Vlad is a young orphan born in the slums of Shura, harboring dreams of a better life but lacking the means to pursue them. Survival has been his only focus, making grand ambitions feel like a distant fantasy. Yet, unbeknownst to him and everyone around him, he possesses the potential to become the greatest swordsman in the world. Beyond mere talent, he possesses the willpower and sheer audacity required to become the deadliest killer. Amidst all the misery, he vowed that if given the chance, he would change his life. But is that promise genuine? When circumstances spiraled far beyond his imagination, he caught a fleeting glimpse of an opportunity to pursue his ultimate dream. However, he would have to begin from the very bottom. It doesn't matter whether you're lost in the depths of a slum or gazing up at the night sky, a hand can still rise from the rubble and refuse to be buried by despair. As long as you yearn to shine, as long as there's light in your heart, you can believe then you are a star. In front of a blacksmith shop, a boy gazes at a sword with a smile, captivated by its beauty. "I never get tired of looking at it," he muses. Suddenly, a voice breaks through his reverie. "I knew you'd get distracted again." He turns to see Jemina, a familiar face, who playfully chides him. "Vlad, you've been really distracted lately." He chuckles softly, replying, "Cut me some slack, will you? It's one of the few pleasures I have in life." Jemina cautions him that standing there like a lunatic is drawing a lot of attention. Curious, he asks what they're saying about him as she glances around. She approaches him and inquires if he still hears that voice whenever he looks at a sword. He seems to brush off the question. With a hint of concern, she adds that it appears he did something terrible in his past life. After all, what kind of person gets struck by lightning in the middle of nowhere? Especially a black lightning. She laments that he should be spending more time at home, especially since the new bishop disapproves of such ominous signs. After all, he has worked for the Inquisition, and if word gets out, Vlad could very well find himself facing the stake. Vlad brushes it off, insisting she's exaggerating, but she counters that he never truly listens. She reminds him that several witnesses saw him get struck by lightning. It's better for him not to give them any more reasons to be interrogated by the church. Vlad shakes his head, insisting it doesn't make sense. All he's searching for is a sword. She sighs, clearly frustrated, and asks why he doesn't just buy it on credit. "It's too expensive," Vlad replies. Her brow furrows in confusion. "But it's just a piece of metal. How costly can it really be?" After a brief silence, he finally states that it costs 5 gold coins. Jemina can hardly believe it. "You must be joking. With 5 gold coins, you could live for an entire year far better than forking over that much for a mere piece of metal." Suddenly a voice cuts through the air. "Who called it a piece of metal? It's the blacksmiths. Their disdain palpable. Sewer rats like you two don't even deserve to lay eyes on such a masterpiece." Jemina scoffs, claiming that only sewer rats wander past his shop. Who does he expect to buy that thing? She wonders aloud. Is the old man losing his mind? The blacksmith chides her for such a remark, but Jemina presses on, questioning why he even bothers crafting swords when no knights ever visit that forsaken place. Frustrated, the old man barks at both of them, ordering them to return to their shop and wash some dishes. The girl's anger flares as she demands to know how he dares speak to a young lady in such a manner. Vlad, sensing the tension, pulls her back and urges her to stop, provoking the blacksmith, who is now cursing and declaring he won't waste any more words on them. As they walk away, the old man shakes his head, thinking how truly ungrateful they are. He had saved them from hardship, only to be met with insults in return. In these harsh times, it was he who had provided them with plenty of food. Fuming, he turns to head back to his shop, but not before catching sight of something intriguing. Vlad's footprints, etched in the fog, reveal that he lingered there for quite some time. The blacksmith shakes his head, reminding himself that survival should be his focus, not the pursuit of a sword. Those who hail from a place like this can't afford to indulge in dreams, otherwise they risk becoming bitter and disillusioned. The blacksmith knows this all too well. As he examines the sword, he declares that he will only sell it to someone capable of leaving this place. He refuses to let his masterpiece languish here forever. Yet, as he gazes at the blade, he can't help but notice how it reminds him of the boy. Even amidst the grime of this slum, the boy somehow manages to shine. This city serves as the primary trading hub of the northern region, governed by the formidable Vayazant family. Welcome to Shura, a land of beauty and splendor. Yet, beneath this facade lies a darker reality, a shadowy underbelly where the slums reside. Here, everything deemed worthless and repugnant is cast aside, forgotten by the world above. In a bustling bar on the second floor, a man yanks a girl by her hair, his voice dripping with disdain as he questions her audacity to think she could deceive him. Struggling against his grip, she asks what he means by deceived. With a hardened glare, he boasts of his 20 years as a mercenary, declaring that he won't be made a fool of. Just then, someone descends the stairs, lamenting the lack of peace in the establishment. The bald man gestures toward Vlad, a smirk on his face, and instructs him to call for the madame of the place. Vlad cautions that time with the madame comes at a price gold, not silver. The bald man scoffs, declaring that this place is nothing but a dump unworthy of gold. He boasts that with that amount he could even buy his mother. Vlad simply stares at him, unamused. The bald man continues, ranting about the candles they're using, claiming they're a scam. He hadn't even managed to take his shirt off properly before one of them flickered out. Vlad smirks and asks if the man truly believed he could have fun with just a 5-minute candle. If you're so broke that you can't afford more time, he taunts, maybe you should head home and squeeze your wife's butt instead. The man's veins bulge ominously, even on his bald head. Unfazed, Vlad declares he's too noisy and decides to demonstrate something. He gestures toward the clock, saying, let's see if that candle really lasts 5 minutes. If the candle doesn't last, he can unleash all his frustration on the woman he's holding. The bald man, seething with anger, declares that he refuses to believe a bunch of scammers like Vlad. With a steely gaze, Vlad insists that he must take part in this bet. If the candle burns for more than 5 minutes, the bald man will face a beating that could cost him years off his life. The mercenary trembles, bewildered by how such a young child can exude such a terrifying aura. Without a moment's hesitation, Vlad strikes the match, declaring that they will soon discover who the scammer truly is. The bald man begins to sweat as the seconds tick by, while the girl observes intently, her eyes filled with anticipation. The atmosphere in the bar crackles with anticipation as everyone leans in, eager for the moment to unfold. Finally, the candle flickers and goes out. The bald man glances at the clock, realizing that 5 minutes have slipped away. Just then, he takes a punch to the face, stumbling backward in shock. With a smirk, Vlad announces, exactly 5 minutes have passed. He lifts his foot and delivers a swift kick to the bald man's backside, sending him tumbling into a small room. Vlad steps inside and shuts the door, a smirk on his face as he warns, you might want to start praying now. Desperation flickers in the chubby man's eyes as he pleads for Vlad to wait, but mercy is not in Vlad's nature today. He begins to pummel him, accusing him of being a liar. Now, repeat what you said about the mother who doesn't even have, he demands, his voice dripping with menace. With that, the unfortunate fellow takes quite a beating. The next day, during a meal, someone remarks that the candles barely last 5 minutes. It's Vlad, inquiring if anyone heard what he said. A man named Knight sits calmly, and Vlad addresses him as George, emphasizing that they're tampering with their primary source of income. Suddenly, a girl in the room screams, demanding to know who has the audacity to meddle with the sacred candles of this place. Vlad remarks that they'll have to figure it out. The girl responds with a grin, saying it's great because that's now his new job. Vlad, puzzled, wonders how he's supposed to uncover that. Suddenly, the girl chimes in, claiming she already knows the answer. Intrigued, Vlad asks who it was. With a playful smirk, she reveals that it was her who tampered with the candles. Introducing herself as Marcella, she explains that she was simply trying to squeeze a little more money out of that rowdy group of drunks. She shines with a radiant glow, while George and Vlad remain silent. Later, he descends the stairs, grappling with the unsettling thought that he may have fought for no reason at all. But what can he do? If the man was at fault, then it's already done. Suddenly, someone calls out to him, mentioning they heard about his fight yesterday. They express gratitude for resolving the situation and curiously ask why things seem to go awry whenever he steps away for a moment. Barry wraps his arms around Vlad, expressing their need for some extra cash. He wonders if he might receive tips from the candles he sold. Vlad narrows his eyes, questioning Barry's intentions. Barry quickly backs off, urging him to relax and insisting there's no need for a threatening demeanor. He clarifies that he isn't asking for money, he's proposing a deal. Intrigued, Vlad asks, "What kind of deal?" Barry leans in, a sly grin on his face. "If you hand over the money, I'll give you something you want," he promises. He then grabs the boy by his hair, lifting him off the ground. "Do you recognize him?" he taunts. "I'll sell him to you for just 40 silver coins. A real bargain, wouldn't you say?" Vlad raises an eyebrow, skepticism etched on his face. "How are the boy's fingers and ankles?" Barry chuckles. "Still intact, I assure you. We'd never sell anything damaged." They made only a minor adjustment, but he remains healthy and strong. Vlad, filled with defiance, tells them to go to hell and tosses the money to the ground. He warns them that next time they shouldn't bother calling him. They should just eliminate the kid. Barry and his friends walk away, insisting they're too honest to harm a boy like that. Yet, Vlad knows the truth. They're all just a bunch of liars. As they depart, they remark on how predictable it was that Vlad would accept the offer. There must be a reason behind his interest in all these street kids. Suddenly, Vlad calls out to a boy named Ned. The boy, looking guilty, apologizes and admits he tried to escape. Vlad fixes him with a piercing gaze and asks, "Did you break anything?" Ned quickly replies, "No." With a chilling tone, Vlad warns him, "Now disappear before I have to become you too." Ned rises to his feet, expressing his gratitude to Vlad. Meanwhile, Vlad contemplates the challenge ahead, pondering how he'll manage to gather 5 gold coins at this pace. The city of Skora buzzes with activity, and a nearby scribe remarks on the boy's fortune. He could have easily lost both fingers for attempting such a theft. This scribe is Harvum, the attendant of Captain Hoover, who bears the scars of his own misfortunes, his fingers severed and his ankles slashed. Harvum remarks to Vlad that he heard the candles from the Smiling Rose had been tampered with, a troubling rumor that seems to be spreading quickly. Vlad nods, acknowledging the rapid flow of information lately. Harvum adds that everyone is pointing fingers at the madam, but he firmly believes she would never stoop to such underhanded tactics. Vlad agrees, noting that George, too, isn't one to stir up trouble without good reason. Harvum isn't naive. He understands that if they know the man committed this act, he must have a compelling reason. Vlad inquires about what that reason might be, and the boy responds that the man is likely in urgent need of money. "We should be cautious," he warns, "because families only gather money so desperately for one reason: a war against another family." Currently, there are 5 bosses who oversee the slums of Skora, each vying for power and control. George, the protector of the brothel girls, looms large like a black bear. Then there's Dice, the notorious gambler, and Captain Hoover, a figure of authority. Lastly, we have the infamous one-armed Jack, known as the Stingy Hand. The most terrifying things in life often creep up on us from the shadows. Right now, Jack stands before Vlad demanding to know where the boss is. Vlad understands that warnings and destruction often arrive without notice. He can't help but wonder why the tight-fisted hand looms before him. Are they gearing up for war? Suddenly, the man beside him shouts, demanding that Vlad answer the boss immediately. Vlad meets his gaze, unfazed, and replies, "I don't know where the boss is. I'm just the guy who sells candles." The lack of a response infuriates the boss, prompting him to lash out and punch the candles, demanding Vlad to call him immediately. As the candles crash to the ground, Vlad remains unfazed, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with the chaos. The room falls silent, with both the girls and Jumino watching the scene unfold in stunned disbelief. Crouching down, Vlad shakes his head, lamenting the loss of so many expensive candles. On the verge of losing his temper, the man demands to know if Vlad thinks this is a joke. Calmly, Vlad asks for permission to proceed. Confused, the man asks what he means, prompting Vlad to repeat himself, insisting that the man move his foot. In that instant, the man's frustration boils over, and he lunges to kick Vlad. To Vlad, this confrontation feels less like a simple altercation and more like a small-scale war. He needed to assess the terrain and devise a strategy. With a swift swing of his broom, he struck the opponent's supporting foot, sending him off balance and leaving him suspended in midair. Seizing the moment, Vlad charged forward, declaring that audacity was essential. He landed a solid blow to the man's jaw, confident that this was the path to victory. The girls in the brothel, the drunks, and even one-armed Jack watch in awe. The protagonist understands a fundamental truth of the slums. The one who stands tall is the victor, while the defeated lie on the ground. The other henchmen are itching to rush in, demanding to know how he could dare to act so boldly. Jack raises his voice, urging everyone to pause. "I really like this kid," he admits, his sincerity evident. He apologizes for not being able to clap louder, explaining, "It's just that I only have one hand." Vlad nods in understanding. "No worries," he replies with a warm smile. "I don't discriminate against anyone with a disability." Jack chuckles, remarking on the kid's wild spirit, but he can't shake the feeling of loss, lamenting that he'll see him again later. He then asks about the child who was with him before, struggling to recall the name. Vlad replies, "If you can't remember the name, that child must have been gone for quite some time." Just then, a voice calls out, breaking the moment. It's George, who exclaims, "Jack, if I'd known you were coming, I would have whipped up something for you to eat." Jack smiles, teasingly asking when they became close enough to share a casual meal. George suggests they head upstairs, noting that it seems Jack has brought some guests along. However, Jack, who is one-armed, replies that he isn't hungry and inquires if there's something good to drink. George assures him that if he goes up, Marcello will take excellent care of him. With that, Jack decides that if that's the case, he might as well give it a try. With that, they depart, and Vlad lets out a sigh of relief, grateful to have narrowly escaped. However, a troubling thought lingers. A group of cannibals has been left broken in their wake. Later, Vlad hears someone calling his name. It's Jack, who mentions that George had spoken very highly of the kid. "I knew you had a good eye for people," Jack says with a grin. He adds, "If you ever tire of the scent of candles, you're welcome to come work for me." Vlad assures them he's fine, mentioning he has something to drink, a place to sleep, and food to eat. One-armed Jack smiles, confident that they can offer him all of that as well. He tosses a coin into Vlad's direction, saying it's for the candles. Vlad catches sight of the gold coin and remarks that its value isn't particularly high. Jack, however, grins and replies that there's plenty more where that came from if Vlad is interested in working for him. With that, he expresses his gratitude for the meal and departs alongside the others. Vlad notices the man smiling, leading him to believe the conversation went well. However, his optimism is short-lived when Jemena from the second floor calls out, saying that George wants to speak with him. As he heads upstairs, the atmosphere is anything but cheerful. Vlad is taken aback when George presents him with a knife as a gift, emphasizing that circumstances are shifting and urging him to keep it close at all times. The atmosphere in the brothel is tense, and Vlad senses the underlying tension. The conversation between Jack and George had been a complete disaster. Jack insisted he didn't want to see George selling cannibals anymore, to which George retorted, "What do you expect me to do then?" George revealed that some of his sources had warned him about Jack bringing in a mercenary knight. Vlad inquired if it was someone akin to himself. George confirmed, yes, someone like you. In Skora, Jack commands a vast gang, but none among them could hope to defeat a former knight like George. After all, as the saying goes, an army of sheep cannot overcome a single wolf. However, the balance of power would shift dramatically if Jack were to hire a former knight as a mercenary. George warns that this would put them at a significant disadvantage, which is why he emphasizes the need for Vlad. He also informs Jack that soon he will receive his first mission. Meanwhile, Harvem, with his fingers and heel tendons cut, struggles to walk properly. Yet, his natural intelligence shines through. He taught himself to read and now serves as an administrator for Captain Hoover. As Vlad caught sight of Harvem, a realization washed over him. Hard work can indeed lead to a better life. With determination, he swung his sword, but a voice interrupted him. "You need to keep your elbows closer to your body when you cut like that." Vlad paused, puzzled. Why did he hear this voice every time he began training? It had been a month since he was struck by black lightning, and since that day, the voice had become an uninvited companion in his journey. Every time he picks up something that resembles a sword, a chilling, demonic voice echoes in his mind. He begins to wonder if perhaps the best course of action is to buy holy water instead of a weapon. Ignoring the voice seems to be the key. After all, the more he engages with it, the more relentless it becomes. He must remain focused, pouring every ounce of his energy and strength into this moment. With determination, he raises his hand, but a voice instructs him to draw his elbow closer. Instinctively, he complies. As he makes the vertical cut, he senses that something has changed. Previously, it was merely the sensation of wielding a sword, but this time, he felt he had conjured something extraordinary in energy that flowed beyond the limits of the blade, known as the blade arc. It left Vlad questioning the source of the voice echoing in his mind. Beneath the moonlight, a figure meticulously cleans a blood-soaked blade, murmuring that age is beginning to take its toll. The winter chill now bites deep, cutting straight to the bone. He hears a clucking sound and muses that while it's not a bad imitation, it must belong to someone rather foolish. Approaching the source, he calls out for the person to stop whatever they're doing because he has arrived. The voice responds, asking if he is Stenger. He confirms that he is, assuming the voice belongs to Vlad. Stenger notes that he knows Vlad hails from the slums, so it's curious to see someone with golden hair and blue eyes. One might easily mistake him for a noble. Vlad hands over a letter from their employer, and Stenger realizes that another family has also hired a mercenary knight. Turning to lead the way, Vlad confidently states that they should arrive in 2 nights. Stenger remains silent, sighing inwardly as he questions whether he should really follow someone so foolish. Vlad confidently claims he knows the way, but Stenger raises an eyebrow, skeptical of his intelligence. After all, Vlad just imitated the sound of a summer bird, an odd choice for a winter day. Stenger warns him sharply, "If I see you veering off course, I won't hesitate to end you right here." Unfazed, Vlad meets his gaze and urges him to keep up, determined not to botch his first mission. Stenger can hardly believe his eyes. He puts on the most intimidating face he can muster, but the boy doesn't flinch for a moment. A smile spreads across his lips as he realizes why George is so fond of this kid. He truly is a diamond in the rough. Later, they find themselves in a cave, and Vlad is simply staring at Stenger. Curiosity piqued, Stenger finally asks, "Why are you looking at me like that?" "Hasn't he ever seen a retired knight before?" Vlad quips. The man replies that he hasn't seen one up close before, suggesting Vlad hasn't ventured far in the world. Curious, Vlad asks where he's from. The man responds, "Dhaka." The boy interjects, recognizing it as a place that's practically in the middle of nowhere. Stenger, with a hint of irritation, wishes Vlad would get lost just so he could have an excuse to take him down. Vlad, unfazed, chuckles and asks, "What, can't knights take a joke?" Stenger remarks that his dried meat appears surprisingly fresh, a delightful treat for him. Vlad, however, regrets to inform him that he didn't bring any for himself and inquires if Stenger has any food. With a grin, Stenger pulls out 2 pieces of aged, dried meat, declaring that he does have something to eat. As Vlad lights the barbecue, Stenger, clearly famished, breathes in the enticing aroma and exclaims how delicious it smells. Stenger leans in, his eyes glinting with mischief. "Do you want to know something, Vlad?" he asks, a hint of challenge in his voice. "I'll answer one question for each piece of dried meat you offer." He smirks, adding, "You're lucky. Opportunities like this don't come around every day." Vlad narrows his eyes, sizing up the situation. "How many pieces do you want?" "Just tell me, and I'll hand them over," he replies, eager to get to the heart of the matter. Stenger chuckles, shaking his head. "I'm proud of you, but remember, a knight only accepts a fair trade." Vlad inquires if the man is retired, to which he affirms with a simple yes. Before Vlad can finish his question, he asks for the man's name. "Stenger," he replies. Curiosity piqued, Vlad asks about his age. 42, Stenger responds, adding with a hint of warning, "But don't push your luck." The boy then asks if he knows how to use aura. Stenger smiles knowingly, saying, "It seems you don't know much about this world. Not all knights possess the ability to wield aura, and using it in combat is an entirely different matter." Vlad hesitates, nervously asking if he can use it. Stenger smiles, and a chill runs down Vlad's spine as he quickly hands over all his dried meat. They lock eyes, and Stenger warns him that he only makes trades of equal value. However, he adds, with a hint of generosity, that he's been stuck eating old dried meat for far too long. Vlad's anxiety surged as he anticipated that the man might unleash his aura right before him. Stenger steadied himself and opened just one eye. Curiously, Vlad asked why he had done that. In the stillness around them, Stenger explained that this was necessary to summon his world, a realm hidden deep within his soul. He urged Vlad to pay close attention, for this was the true essence of a knight. As he opened his eye, Vlad was left in awe. Stenger had activated the aura surrounding his blade. Later, they arrived in Shura, where Stenger grumbled about looking like a beggar. "It's better this way," Vlad replied. "You don't want to stand out." He remarked that it was too disgusting for a knight who must uphold his dignity. Vlad brushed him off, insisting that when they arrived, Stenger should enter through the back door while he would take the front. They began their walk, but Stenger couldn't shake the feeling that the place was unusually quiet. Suddenly, both of them halted in their tracks. Stenger inquired if such sights were normal in this place, to which Vlad simply replied, "No." Before them, the smiling Rose was surrounded by a grim scene. Bodies littered the ground. Vlad then suggested they split up, instructing Stenger to head through the back door. Just as Stenger opened his mouth to ask where Vlad was going, he dashed away, calling back, "I'll see you soon." The scene was a gruesome sight. As Vlad stepped inside, he was met with the devastation of the brothel. Upstairs, Marcelo was tending to George, who had clearly seen better days. "One-armed Jack came and attacked while you were gone," Marcelo explained. Concern etched on Vlad's face as he asked, "Are you okay?" George, still catching his breath, replied, "It's been a long time since I fought a knight." Then, with urgency in his voice, he asked, "Did you bring the person with you?" Vlad confirmed that he had shown him the back doors, so he should be arriving soon. George remarked that tomorrow they would settle the score with that one-armed Jack, then asked Vlad what he thought of the guy, if he still had all 4 limbs. Vlad replied that he seemed fine and appeared to be a decent fellow. George inquired if he had lost weight, to which Vlad noted that he was quite agile. George felt a surge of confidence. After all, he knew how to wield aura, and he was certain they could handle whatever came their way tomorrow. Suddenly, he was jolted from his thoughts as the back door creaked open. Vlad stepped inside, announcing that their guest had likely arrived. "Are you sure he used aura?" George called out, his voice laced with concern. "Absolutely," Vlad replied, his expression serious. "I saw it with my own eyes." With a determined grip, George snatched up the blade, turning to Vlad. "Stay behind me," he instructed, ready to face whatever awaited them. Stanger was not a knight skilled in the use of aura. Vlad was taken aback when Stanger opened the door, exclaiming it had been a long time since they last met, and greeted George. In that moment, as Stanger appeared, he was wiping a bloody blade, lamenting how the cold had seeped deep into his bones. Unbeknownst to them, the real Stanger lay dead just behind him. Now standing face to face with George, the man remarked that he had changed quite a bit. George, curious, asked why he had suddenly appeared. The man replied that Count Gator had died. Though the news hadn't been made public yet due to some complications, it wouldn't be long before everyone found out. He raised his glass, declaring it was a toast to the unfortunate Count of Gator. Enraged, George confronted the man who calmly observed him. In a flash, the stranger struck, shattering half the floor, but vanished before anyone could register his movement. From behind George, he revealed that his actions were for Sigmund, the new Count of Gator. George shouted the name, calling out to the man as Godin, and launched a punch that Godin deftly defended. Godin announced that the new Lord Sigmund had ordered Knight George to return immediately. In defiance, George shouted that Sigmund was not his master. Godin calmly replied that Sigmund was fully aware of George's stubbornness and, in fact, didn't want him to return at all. As their confrontation escalated, the entire room was caught in the chaos of their fierce battle, crumbling around them. Vlad seized Marcella's arm, urgency in his voice as he insisted they needed to leave. They burst through the door, stepping into the chaos outside. Just then, a group of guys called out to Vlad, demanding to know what was going on. Without missing a beat, Vlad shouted for Barry to alert everyone they had a serious problem on their hands. Suddenly, George hurtled past him, adding to the mounting tension. Marcella, Vlad, and the others watched in shock as he fell to the ground from Godin's brutal blow. Godin sneered, remarking that he was as foolish as ever. The brothel staff rushed to ask if their boss was all right, but he writhed in pain on the floor, while Godin loomed over him, a menacing figure. Just then, a knife flew through the air toward Godin, but he deftly deflected it, his instincts sharp despite the chaos. Vlad had thrown the object standing just beside Godin. Ignoring Vlad's warning to be careful, Godin leaped toward George, who was just getting to his feet and nearly took the hit. Godin glared at him, insisting he should have followed the orders from that day. George shot back defiantly, declaring that he was human and refused to obey such repulsive commands. "But I am not human. I am a knight," Godin declared. George gritted his teeth, determination surging within him as he began to rise amidst the crowd. Suddenly, Godin added that the night had already stretched on too long. With that, he closed his eyes, stating he needed to rest. Meanwhile, Vlad dashed down the stairs, his eyes widening in shock as he realized Godin had activated the aura of his blade. He shouted to warn everyone. Just as Godin opened his eye, he commanded him to stop. White lines began to etch themselves onto the bodies of everyone in the brothel. With a swift movement of his blade, Godin unleashed a blinding flash that obliterated the entire place. When the smoke finally cleared, Vlad found himself lying on the floor. On the first floor, he stood in shock, trying to comprehend the scene before him. The members of the Smiling Rose lay lifeless, and words failed him. Suddenly, he heard a voice beside him and turned to see George, but his gaze was drawn to the blood staining the ground. Memories flooded back. George had been the first to extend a hand to him, a boy from the slums. He recognized the boy's potential before anyone else did. To the boy, he was the strongest person he had ever encountered. But on that quiet night, beneath the pale moonlight, the boy's world was shattered. Vlad snatched the sword from the ground and charged at Godin, shouting for him to stop. As he activated the sword's arc, it caught Godin's attention. Surprised, Godin wondered how the slum kid had managed to pull that off. "Impressive," he remarked, just as Vlad closed in, his voice filled with fury as he yelled, "Die!" Suddenly, a sharp blow struck Godin's stomach, sending him crashing into the corner of the room. In that fleeting moment, he recognized the boy's innate talent. Just before the kick landed, Godin had twisted his body to lessen the impact. Struggling to rise, Vlad's inner voice urged him to breathe, otherwise, he risked losing consciousness. Godin recognized the boy's talent as something far too precious to let perish, even if it meant risking a future confrontation with a stronger opponent. It reminded him of George's words about the joy of witnessing the growth of someone with potential. With a smile, Godin turned to Vlad and said that knights only engage in fair trades. Vlad, puzzled by this statement, listened intently as Godin revealed that his name wasn't Stanger and that he wasn't actually 42 years old. He returned 2 pieces of dried meat, declaring that was the price of the lie. However, he would claim George's head, both as a reward and a symbol of his victory. Vlad glared at him, vowing to kill him. But Godin simply turned away, suggesting it would be wiser for Vlad to accept the meat rather than trade his life for nothing. Vlad understood he had no chance. As Godin walked away, he vowed that one day he would kill him, even if it meant sacrificing everything. Godin, however, paid him no mind, striding toward the door with George's severed head in hand, while Vlad's shouts echoed in the empty room. Later, he reunited with Jemina, desperate to escape that cursed place. But after the brutal fight, he felt utterly defeated. The kick had shattered some of his ribs. As the chaos subsided, Marcella rushed to his side, urging him to get up or risk dying right there. Vlad remained unresponsive, prompting her irritation to boil over. She slapped him, demanding he wake up to reality, and questioned whether he understood the stark difference between the wealthy and those who struggle to survive in the slums. Opportunity is everything. Those at the top can afford to make mistakes and keep failing. But for them, one misstep here could spell disaster. She seized his cloak, her voice steady but urgent, warning him that in this place, a single error could cost him his life. It was crucial that he seize this one chance to escape. Jemina turned to Vlad, asking if he wanted to take it slower. He assured her it was fine. He wasn't ready to let things end just yet. Suddenly, a voice erupted from behind them, a man shouting that they were found. Both Vlad and Jemina realized they were being hunted by Jack's men. The nest had become chaotic, and even the youngest birds were forced to learn to fly on their own. Sometime later, the street buzzes with Jack's henchmen scouring the area for the two fugitives. The man who had earlier knocked over the candles proclaims that a generous reward awaits anyone who finds them. As the search intensifies, Vlad and Jemina huddle behind a door, acutely aware that, at this rate, escape seems impossible. Vlad urged her to head to the coastal region once things settled down. When she asked what he would do, he assured her he would manage. However, he warned that staying by his side would only increase the danger. Jemina shouted defiantly, insisting she would not abandon him, but Vlad gently reminded her of her promise to do it for Marcella. He urged her to seek help from Harvin, but she stubbornly refused. Frustrated, Vlad shouted that she was being a nuisance, questioning whether he looked like someone who could protect her in that moment. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to find the words when someone asked who was there. In that tense moment, she seized a blade resting nearby and aimed it at the intruder. It was the blacksmith holding a lantern, his expression a mix of confusion and concern. "Why are there two kids in my shop?" he demanded. Jemina's voice rang out firm and unwavering. "Don't move," the old man, bewildered, shot back. "Have you lost your minds? This is my home." Jemina's frustration boiled over as she shouted, "If you don't keep quiet, I swear I'll attack you right now." The old man simply observed them for a moment. After a long pause, he acknowledged the seriousness of the situation, but requested that she put the blade away. Jemina gritted her teeth, insisting that he hand over the sword immediately. The old man, confused, asked what she meant. She clarified, demanding the sword that was always displayed in front of the forge. Vlad urged Jemina to put it away, but she persisted, shouting at the old man to surrender the sword. The blacksmith understood the harsh realities of the slums. Survival often meant making difficult choices, just as he had done to get this far. Now, it seemed, it was this young girl's turn to face that grim truth. The old man regarded her with a mix of pity and resignation. Jemina tightened her grip on the handle, her determination palpable. "Don't do it," Vlad warned, concern etched on his face. Meanwhile, the old man simply closed his eyes, resigned to the moment. In a sudden, bold move, Jemina drew a knife and sliced through her own hair. The old man jumped in surprise. "It's the only thing of value I have," she declared, her voice steady despite the weight of her actions. "But I promise, I'll come back and repay everything." All she requested was for him to deliver the sword to Vlad. The old man watched, unsure of what to say, and turned to Vlad, asking if he was leaving. Vlad nodded in affirmation. The old man couldn't help but think that he had never imagined such a moment in his lifetime. Yet here was the young man before him, ready to take flight, even before his wings had fully grown. He remarked that the two of them were a nuisance, but instructed them to follow him anyway. After a while, he emerged from the shop, pulling a cart behind him. Jemina wrinkled her nose at the smell, and he shrugged, explaining it was their only option. Just then, a voice called out, questioning what he was doing on the street at such a late hour. The blacksmith sensed the men would be relentless, and he knew this escape route would soon be cut off. One of them stepped forward and inquired why he was taking out the trash at such a late hour. The blacksmith erupted in frustration, blaming them for the chaos they caused throughout the city every single day. After all the turmoil, he could only find a moment to leave now. The man urged the old blacksmith to take it easy, but the blacksmith's gaze shifted suspiciously to the figure behind him, questioning who it was, since he usually worked alone. the old man shouted, insisting he needed to hire someone to help push the cart. He declared that he would let the man go solely because he was the only blacksmith in that slum. However, he insisted on taking a closer look at him first. With a swift motion, he placed the sword against the person's hood, warning them not to move or risk losing an arm. Then, with a decisive cut, he sliced away the hood. The old man was taken aback by Jamina's sickly imitation of a beggar, pleading for just a piece of bread. After witnessing her performance, he agreed to let them pass. Curiosity got the better of him, and he asked who they were searching for at such an hour. The man replied that they were looking for Vlad, who worked for Georgie, as he began to pull the cart away. He declared he was leaving, but the old man insisted on checking one last time. Vlad crouched beneath the trash, heart racing as the man made a call for someone to investigate. In that tense moment, all three understood the stakes. If anyone conducted a thorough search, everything would unravel. A dark-skinned man wielding a spear approached, confidently asserting that he would take care of the situation. The old man, filled with doubt, pondered whether he should have chosen a different path. But deep down, he knew those routes were likely blocked as well. The man commented on the surprising amount of trash, but his expression shifted as he noticed something unusual. He readied his spear, and a wave of insecurity washed over Jamina. "Don't blame me," he said. "I'm just doing my job." With that, he lunged at the pile, aggressively rummaging through the debris. Jamina and the blacksmith exchanged worried glances, sensing that trouble was just around the corner. The man rummaged through the trash when he suddenly recalled that Harvin had left a boat near the river. This piqued their curiosity, as it was unusual for someone unable to walk to do such a thing. He urged them to stay vigilant before suggesting they could leave. The blacksmith then took hold of the cart, and the man remarked that this should be considered payment for the 40 silver coins his younger brother owed Vlad. With that, they departed, Vlad expressing his gratitude to Otar until they reached the edge of the dump. The old man explained that everything from the city was discarded there. Jamina then turned to Vlad, urging him to stay safe. After that, he unloaded the cart, but in the process, he stumbled and fell, taking a star with him. That was the culmination of an old man's dream and a young girl's tears. Sometime later, in the mountains, Vlad gazed at the blade in his hand and asked if it could hear him. To his surprise, the blade replied that it could. Curious, Vlad pressed on, asking who it was. The blade admitted, somewhat regretfully, that it didn't know. Frustration bubbled within Vlad as he exclaimed, "You keep trying to boss me around, yet you don't even know your own identity." Perhaps that was a blessing in disguise. Vlad could assist the voice in recovering its memories, while in return, it would teach him the art of swordsmanship. He didn't care if it was some sort of demon. All he felt at that moment was a single, gnawing fear being a nobody. With that realization, the voice finally accepted his proposal. It would teach him everything it knew about fencing. Sometime later, at a military base, a figure studied a map of the region. His name was Yosef Vezid, and he muttered to himself, "This all seems too easy. Too easy." Just then, someone entered the tent, calling out, "Master Joseph." Joseph turned to see Zayar standing before him. Zayar noticed something was troubling Yosef and asked him what was wrong. Yosef replied that everything felt too easy. Zayar acknowledged their success, but reminded him that many were deserting and some had vanished without explanation. Joseph added that if the mission he was part of yielded mediocre results, it would cast doubt on his abilities as a leader. Zayar remained silent, overshadowed by the presence of his father and other family members, particularly his older brother, Reker. Joseph couldn't shake the thought that if things continued on this path, Reker would surely be the next count. The Vezid family was steeped in a legacy of warriors, a history marked by triumphs and betrayals. After all, his father had risen to power by eliminating his own brothers. Joseph admitted he didn't have many allies by his side, aside from Zayar. Approaching him, Zayar insisted they needed to discuss something important. He mentioned that one of the mercenaries had raised his suspicions. Joseph's brow furrowed as he asked if Zayar believed it was a spy for Reker. Zayar shook his head, clarifying that it wasn't that kind of suspicion. Rather, it was something Joseph would only grasp if he witnessed it for himself. Just then, their attention was drawn to a goblin lying on the ground, its belly slashed open. Joseph scoffed, calling the cuts on the goblin pathetic. "This is the work of a total amateur," he remarked. Zayar urged him to examine another goblin, but Joseph dismissed it as terrible as well. "Whoever did this has awful fencing skills," he continued, shaking his head. As he scanned the rest, he finally spotted one that looked slightly better. However, he soon realized that while the skill appeared to be improving, the trajectory of the cuts remained eerily consistent. He turned to Zayar and inquired if all of this was the work of a single individual. Zayar confirmed it was true. One had arrived today while the others had come a month earlier. As he processed this information, Joseph couldn't help but think it was impossible for someone to evolve so drastically in just a month. Curiosity piqued, he asked, "Who is this person?" Deep within the forest, chaos erupted as goblins writhed in agony, falling one by one to the mercenaries they had hired to combat them. The seasoned warriors shouted commands to one another, urging their comrades to hold their ground and ensure that none of the creatures escaped. One of the fighters brandished his spear, declaring that the battle was nearing its end and urging everyone to finish off the remaining foes. However, his comrades stood frozen in fear. Unbeknownst to him, a massive goblin loomed behind. In an instant, the creature struck, crushing him with a single blow. Shock rippled through the group as they processed the horrifying turn of events. The monster roars, charging toward them with terrifying force, effortlessly shattering the front line. The mercenaries exchange worried glances, questioning its origins and how they might defeat such a beast. In a moment of desperation, they rush toward a chubby man perched on a horse, hoping he has a plan. He demands to know what they think they're doing and orders them to return to the front line immediately. However, the mercenaries refuse, claiming no one informed them they would be facing a hobgoblin. If that's the case, they expect a much higher payment. Just then, the chubby mercenary reaches for his blade, calling them a bunch of useless fools. But before he can make a move, a body drops right beside him. The monster is slaughtering their entire group. Observing the scene, he calmly sheaths his blade, but his moment of peace is interrupted as someone approaches. A young man with blonde hair steps forward, inquiring about his identity. Recognizing him as Lyman the Worshipper, the truth of Vlad's deception becomes clear. With a surge of confidence, Vlad prepares to confront the hobgoblin. He charges forward, and the monster quickly becomes aware of his presence. Before the creature could react, he slashed back, only to realize too late that the cut was too shallow. Just as he sensed an attack coming from behind, he barely managed to dodge, frustration boiling within him at yet another failure. The sword, ever the critic, questioned how he could struggle when it had provided him with all the guidance he needed. Vlad shot back, exasperated. "I'm not a genius. I can't just listen and execute flawlessly." As the monster looms closer, he realizes that for now, his only goal is to find a way to win. The creature lunges at him with a fierce attack, which he narrowly dodges. Another strike follows, and he ducks just in time. A swing comes perilously close to his face, causing the creature to lose its temper. In that moment of rage, it prepares for a powerful vertical strike. The attack sends snow swirling in every direction, but Vlad skillfully dodges once more, declaring that this time he will cut through it. The monster glances back just as Vlad lunges forward with a fierce slash. Meanwhile, Joseph expresses his desire for Zayar to uncover everything about a figure known as Lyman the Worshipper. Zayar readily accepts the mission, while Joseph can't help but think how unbelievable it all is. In just a month, someone can transform from amateur cuts to nearly executing a blade arc, and Vlad smiles, realizing the potential within him. With a swift slash, he takes down the creature, and Joseph can't help but think that Vlad is a genius. After the battle, the townsfolk begin collecting the goblin bodies, muttering that there's nothing of value among them. One enthusiastic villager approaches, grinning as he praises the captain's incredible skills. Vlad, however, cuts him off, urging him to stop the flattery and focus on gathering the bodies of the creatures he defeated. The man insists he's already taken care of that and reminds Vlad that their job is nearing its end, suggesting they continue their partnership. However, Vlad firmly replies that he despises looking into the eyes of a criminal, let alone working alongside one. Undeterred, the man brings up the mercenary, warning Vlad that he won't be able to rely on it for much longer. He then offers to call someone who can create a perfect replica. Vlad warns Gath that a loose tongue can lead to a swift demise in this place, and he hopes it's not a threat. The poor guy trembles, insisting he was only trying to help, arguing that with such impressive skills, the boy shouldn't be stuck here. Vlad cuts him off, commanding him to finish the preparations unless he's grown tired of having his head attached to his body. With a nod, Gath replies that he'll take care of it. As Vlad contemplates the inevitable confrontation with this man, he decides to leave the troops behind. Observing his departure, the soldiers remark that Lyman appears to be heading off to pray once more. In the heart of the forest, Lyman kneels, resting his head on his sword. To the onlookers, he seems like the scion of a noble family, standing apart from them in both demeanor and grace. Vlad questions the voice, wondering why he can't defeat the monsters with a single cut. The voice, with a hint of exasperation, reminds him that it has explained this 1,000 times. The key to a lethal attack lies in its precision and element of surprise. Frustrated, Vlad urges it to clarify. The voice instructs him to recall the moment when enemies raised their swords. In that instant, he must seize the opportunity and strike with a swift, decisive whoosh. Vlad grumbles, questioning how he's supposed to make sense of such ridiculous tips. The voice responds, insisting it's simple, just focus on the WAKISH and the whoosh. Meanwhile, Vlad stands there, torn between prayer and frustration, while the others around him shower him with blessings. The camp buzzes with activity, but there's one glaring issue. The meat served here is decidedly questionable. Gath remarks that he shouldn't complain about the food, especially since it's free. After all, not many families, aside from the Vezids, offer such generosity. Meanwhile, Vlad rises from his seat and encourages everyone to enjoy the meal. The others exchange glances, speculating whether Vlad is planning to visit the priest again, as he appears to be deep in prayer. He then makes his way to the church tent, where the priest warmly welcomes Lyman. Vlad greets Andrea with a warm smile, hoping he had a restful night. Andrea chuckles, mentioning he heard that the boy braved the cold to pray last night. Vlad replies confidently, "No chill can touch me when I'm wrapped in the Lord's blessings." Andrea laughs, teasing, "You sound more like a priest than I do." Just then, a little boy named Jim burst in, announcing that breakfast is ready. The priest gestures for Vlad to take a seat, but the boy awkwardly replies that he didn't come to eat. Nevertheless, the preparations for prayer are already underway, leaving him with no choice but to express gratitude for the daily bread. As they pray, the priest steals a glance at Vlad. To him, the boy radiates authenticity, someone who has managed to retain his sincerity, even amidst the surrounding misery. He must guide this young man, destined to traverse the blood-stained fields of war until his final day. Perhaps their bond is a divine blessing. With that thought, he says Amen and tells Vlad that it's time to eat. Now, the fortunate lad has fresh bread and steaming hot soup, true nourishment. Andrea then shifts the conversation, expressing a desire to discuss the boy's fencing. He knew he was talented, and even Joseph Fayezid had heard of him. Curious, he asked what happened next. Andrea replied that he had recommended the boy, praising him as a good young man with a bright future ahead. The Fayezid family was well known even in the north, and simply working for them would elevate his life. Andrea assured the boy that he truly deserved this opportunity. In the heart of the forest, Vlad couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a mistake. Perhaps he had drawn too much attention to himself. The voice echoed in his mind, reminding him that there was no other way to learn fencing but through the sword. He pondered whether he had gotten too close to the priest. That could be it, he admitted. The voice then inquired if he had finally stopped believing it was a dark spirit haunting him. Vlad is aware of Father Andrea's solid reputation, even receiving recommendations for the position of bishop. If nothing seems amiss, then he's likely trustworthy. As he contemplates seizing this opportunity, a voice in his mind encourages him, insisting it's a wise choice. Yet Vlad can't shake his insecurities. After all, he earned his insignia by killing another mercenary, and now faces the looming threat of judgment for both fraud and murder. The voice remarks that framing it that way makes him sound like quite the wicked boy. It suggests that their best option for now is to flee, as they aren't the ones being pursued. Vlad declares that the plan is to escape tonight and take God with him. However, the sword suddenly interjects, expressing doubts about his chances of escaping. Confused, he asks what she means. She warns him that someone is approaching from behind, and judging by the energy, it's at least an elite knight. Vlad readies his blade, pointing it backward, but Zayar simply watches him, impressed by his sharp instincts. Lord Joseph wishes to see the boy, Zayar informs him. Vlad rises, surprised that he didn't fall, but he knows he can't show any weakness now. "I feel honored," he replies, masking his uncertainty. Zayar raises an eyebrow. "Did the boy know you were coming?" Vlad mentions that he heard from Father Andrea, though he didn't expect the news to arrive so soon. Zayar, impressed once again, approaches him, and to his surprise, the boy doesn't flinch. With a nod, Zayar begins to walk away, instructing Vlad to follow. As Zayar gains distance, Vlad contemplates making a run for it, but a voice warns him against such a thought. A knight of Zayar's caliber could sever his head in less than 3 steps. Vlad understands he has no choice but to approach Joseph's tent. As he enters, Joseph greets him warmly, expressing that it's a pleasure to meet him. Vlad bows respectfully, replying that it is an honor to meet Lord Joseph, all thanks to the Lord's kindness. Joseph observes Vlad's features and remarks, "With your blonde hair and blue eyes, you almost resemble the son of a noble." He asks if his name is Lyman, and Vlad confirms it. Joseph closes the book, a look of realization crossing his face. I should have known, he mutters. Suddenly, Zayar slaps him across the face, and they lock eyes, tension thick in the air. Joseph turns to Vlad, his voice low and warning. Just so you know, Skora despises liars. Vlad smirks, unfazed. Looks like you already know everything then. Joseph reveals that everyone knows his mother is a prostitute and that they have no idea where his father ended up. He turns to Vlad, asking if he has any insight. Vlad, with a hint of sarcasm, responds, "Is this some kind of joke? Asking the son of a prostitute about his father?" Just then, he receives a swift kick behind the knee, sending him crashing to the ground. Zayar admonishes him to show more respect in this place. Joseph chuckles, insisting it's fine because he found it amusing. However, he warns that he knows Vlad killed a mercenary and understands why he fled Skora. What he doesn't grasp is where the boy learned to wield a sword. Observing him closely, Joseph notes the many secrets hidden behind those eyes. Just then, Zayar begins to draw his sword from behind him. Vlad hesitates for a moment, unsure of how to respond. Then, with a sudden clarity, he reveals that he learned everything from a master who appeared and vanished as swiftly as light. He mentions the master's name but emphasizes that this is a secret sword technique, one that cannot be taught by anyone else. Joseph notices the unwavering determination in the boy's eyes and, feeling a pang of regret, apologizes for his earlier harshness. Vlad finds himself questioning his own beliefs. The Lord, sensing his uncertainty, reveals that he has a pressing issue at hand. He leans in, asking if Vlad of Skora aspires to a better life, one filled with power, freedom, survival, and the allure of the night. With a glint of ambition in his eyes, Joseph Fazit offers to sponsor him. Soon after he began training with Zayar, the other mercenaries remarked that he was holding his own. It seemed he had become Zayar's squire, a promising turn for the boy. Little did he know, his life was about to change dramatically. In a sudden strike, Zayar chastised him, calling him an arrogant brat. "How can you be so confident in front of Joseph with such poor fencing skills?" he demanded, his voice a mix of frustration and challenge. Now he's about to show Vlad his true strength. Vlad struggles to keep up. His opponent is on an entirely different level. Every time he dodges, he finds himself taking another hit. Defending head-on proves futile, as the force behind each strike is overwhelming. Realizing this, Vlad positions his sword to shield his shoulder, bracing for the next blow. He allows Zayar's blade to slip past him, seizing the moment to launch a direct attack. Yet, the opponent effortlessly blocks it, leaving the mercenaries in awe. Even Zayar admits he found the move somewhat impressive. But Vlad understands the truth behind it all. Zayar had engineered that opportunity solely to test his own capabilities. He then informs the boy that their training will take place both in the morning and evening twice a day. The poor boy looks terrified. He quickly excuses himself, saying that's enough for a morning session, and advises him not to linger in the cold. Vlad is left wondering if that's all there is to it. He didn't receive a single piece of advice. Yet, as the voice echoes in his mind, it reassures him that it was indeed an excellent fight, one that helped eliminate all unnecessary movements. Sometimes, a good beating is the best way to learn, Joseph muses, observing the boy who seems to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. The poor lad wonders why no one ever stands by his side. As the session comes to a close, Joseph turns to him and asks for his impression of the boy. "He has potential," the boy replies thoughtfully. "If he were the son of a noble family, perhaps even the Count himself would take an interest in him." Joseph's smile widens, a glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. "I knew I was right about you," he says, the words hanging in the air with a mix of hope and possibility. Zayar cautions that the real issue lies in the boy's arrogance. He simply doesn't know his place. The Lord replies, "It's understandable. He grew up in the slums after all. It's only natural for him to act this way. Besides, I have just the right person for the job." Zayar counters, "A knight without loyalty is not to be trusted." Joseph interjects, "I wouldn't believe the boy even if he knelt before me the moment we met." In fact, he takes pride in his honesty about his feelings. Vlad mentioned he has something he must attend to, and for the Lord, this arrangement is preferable. They both have desires that align, allowing them to assist one another. The knight simply nods in agreement, acknowledging that if that's the case, then everything is acceptable. The boy, however, resembles a wolf full of arrogance, untrustworthy, and undeniably presumptuous. However, Joseph reassures him, saying he's in no hurry. After all, it takes time to construct a cage large enough for a wolf to believe it's free. Meanwhile, in the depths of winter, Gotch shivers in the forest, grappling with the shocking reality that Vlad has now become Zayar's squire. The thought of their escape growing more difficult weighs heavily on him. Perhaps he was fortunate. Now he was spared from the biting cold and the grueling training with the expeditionary forces. Just then, a knight approached, his presence commanding attention. Gott recognized him as Roderick. "Is everything all right?" Roderick inquired, scanning the surroundings. "Everything's fine," Gott replied, offering a reassuring nod. "Good. Just keep an eye out for any issues," Roderick instructed before turning to leave. "Count on me," Gott assured him, a sense of responsibility settling in. He stands there watching Roderick, taking in the scene. The man resembles a statue, so still that not even a needle could rouse him. But now that he's present, he finally feels he can catch some sleep. He drifts off, only to be jolted awake moments later. Roderick's voice cuts through the silence, asking what someone is doing there and noting that it seems like someone is searching for a child. He watches Roderick from a distance as he questions a woman, insisting, "I'm not her son." Gott finds the scene bewildering, puzzled by Roderick's abrupt pause mid-sentence. Swallowing hard, he begins to move toward them, his mind racing with confusion. Why is Roderick heading away from the camp? Just then, a thick black mist envelops the man, shrouding him in an ominous veil. In that moment, Gott trembled. The following day, Vlad found himself utterly exhausted, questioning why Zayar couldn't just show a little kindness. Yet, a voice within him urged him to appreciate the opportunity, reminding him that few in this world had the chance to train with someone so skilled. Vlad retorted, convinced that Zayar was intentionally hitting him hard. The voice replied, suggesting that this development only made things worse, leaving Vlad feeling despondent as he realized no one seemed to be on his side. Just then, someone called for Lemon. It was Gott, peeking out from behind a tree, eager to speak with him. Vlad approached, curious about what he had to say. Gott revealed that he planned to escape that very night, adding that he was confiding in Vlad because they were friends. Vlad was puzzled by the wild claims of the man before him, but Gott insisted he had witnessed it firsthand. He spoke of a forest haunted by a monster that bore a curse. Vlad's unease was palpable, prompting Gott to question why so many had vanished if the food and working conditions were decent. The grim reality was that there were no deserters. They had all fallen victim to the curse. He warned that he had seen one of the knights being taken into the forest. However, Vlad dismissed him, growing angry and telling him to stop spouting nonsense just to escape. But Gott persisted, insisting it was true, and asked if Vlad was unaware of the knight who had vanished. Vlad narrowed his eyes and asked if he was referring to Roderick. Gott nodded in affirmation. He explained that another peculiar detail was that every person who had vanished shared one striking feature: black hair. At least the protagonist seemed immune to this unsettling trend. Meanwhile, Gott wore a furious expression. It seemed Vlad had revealed everything to Zayar, who now commanded Gott to lead the way. Zayar questioned whether the man could be trusted, and Vlad assured him he's not the type to lie. Zayar viewed this as a chance to elevate Joseph's achievements. After all, uncovering a phenomenon and vanquishing ghosts was far more thrilling than merely fending off goblins. However, he couldn't shake off his unease about the mysterious black hair. Concern etched on his face. He glanced at Vlad, who reassured him that with the 3 knights on the field, everything would be just fine. The only person stronger than Roderick in that place was Zayar, so he took charge of the advance. After some time, Gott announced they had located the expeditionary forces. A boy named Ern stepped forward, introducing himself as Roderick's squire. Zayar inquired if they had discovered anything, to which Ern replied, unfortunately, no. Despite having the best hunters and researchers, they had found no footprints. Zayar understood that he needed to take matters into his own hands. He instructed everyone to form groups of 3, ensuring they stayed within sight of one another as they began their search of the area. Meanwhile, Gott seethed with anger at Vlad for reporting him. "You took advantage of my goodwill," he fumed. Vlad, unfazed, replied, "Enough complaining. Just keep looking." Zayar inquired if they had uncovered any leads, but they responded with a disappointing no. Frustrated, Zayar labeled them useless and questioned how they could fail to locate someone who vanished in the slums. Vlad explained that they had resorted to interrogating the nearest person to the disappearance, extracting whatever information they could. It was hardly the breakthrough Zayar had hoped for. As night began to fall, he realized they would soon have to return empty-handed, a thought that weighed heavily on him. At that moment, something piqued his interest. He turned to the group and asked if anyone had checked the other side of the river. Gott replied that no one had, as the expeditionaries had overlooked that area. Zayar considered it might be the last place they could find any clues. Without hesitation, he ordered everyone to gather the mercenaries and prepare to cross the river. With a nod, Gott signaled for everyone to assemble. As he stepped onto the ice, he noted that it wasn't entirely solid. Vlad chimed in, suggesting it seemed sturdy enough for a few people to cross. Just then, a group of mercenaries approached, inquiring if they had discovered anything. Zayar shook his head, explaining that they planned to cross to the other side of the river in groups of 3. The others nodded in agreement, and soon everyone began making their way across the ice. Gott hesitated, and Vlad noticed. "What's the problem?" he asked, biting his lip. Gott admitted he had a terrible feeling. Vlad replied, "That feeling? It's called fear." Gott nodded, acknowledging the truth. "Of course I'm afraid. I'm not some genius knight. Someone as weak as me can only survive by relying on good instincts." At that moment, every instinct within him screamed not to cross the lake. Vlad, however, couldn't grasp the instincts Gott was referring to. Yet, he was certain of one thing. If Gott attempted to flee, he would meet his end right there. It was far too suspicious that the sole witness to the crime was trying to escape. Vlad urged Gott to remain silent and cross the river swiftly, emphasizing the need to avoid drawing any more attention to themselves. Gott reluctantly complied, though he insisted it was a terrible idea. The moment he stepped onto the ice, it cracked beneath him, and he warned that it was bound to break. Vlad nodded in agreement, but added that if Gott didn't take another step, he'd throw him into the water. In response, Gott collapsed to the ground, claiming he couldn't move his leg. With a firm grip on his collar, Vlad urged him to get up, insisting they had to keep moving or risk falling behind. At that moment, Gott let out a terrified scream. Vlad urged him to be quiet, but their attention was quickly drawn to something lurking beneath the ice. Countless bodies lay frozen beneath the river's surface. They shouted to warn everyone that the missing people were trapped below. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble, sending everyone into a panic as they scrambled to escape. A hand broke through the ice, and soon, the bodies rose as zombies. In an instant, they found themselves surrounded in the middle of the lake, looking to Zaire for guidance. It dawned on him that this was a trap. Someone had meticulously orchestrated this, fully aware of their arrival. The creatures before them were not of the living world. Meanwhile, back at the camp, the priest and the boy were deep in prayer. Suddenly, Andrea began to tremble, prompting the boy to ask if he was all right. The water around them started to cloud, and a strange energy began to swirl around the chalice. Unbeknownst to them, someone was watching from a distance, drawing closer. It was the woman who had been searching for a child. Amidst the chaos, the zombies closed in on Gott, leaving him on the brink of death. Just then, Vlad intervened, slicing one of the creatures in half with a swift strike. But the threat was far from over. An endless horde continued to surge forward. With fierce determination, Vlad dispatched 7 more zombies in rapid succession. Meanwhile, Gott, paralyzed by fear, collapsed to the ground. "Grab your spear," Vlad urged, his voice cutting through the panic. A voice urged Vlad to remain calm and assess his surroundings before making any moves. Advancing was out of the question due to the crack in the ground, leaving him to ponder Zaire's whereabouts. Meanwhile, Zaire was navigating through the chaos, skillfully cutting through the crowd. However, the situation was dire. Many soldiers were falling, and the battle felt unending. As he fought, Zaire couldn't shake the nagging question of the trap's true purpose. He realized he couldn't be certain, but he knew who the target was. Without a moment's hesitation, he activated the aura of his blade just as the monsters lunged at him. With a single swift slash, he reduced them to mere fragments. The soldiers erupted in cheers, convinced that Zaire would be their savior. Then, with a commanding voice, Zaire called out to Vlad, reminding him to uphold his end of the bargain. Vlad glanced back, questioning what Zaire needed him to do. Zaire instructed him to return to the base and protect Joseph until he got back. Without hesitation, Vlad agreed and took off running, calling for Gott to join him. As he watched them disappear into the distance, Zaire silently hoped his prayers would reach Joseph. Suddenly, someone stepped on his back, and Zaire turned to confront the attacker. As he gazed upon the zombie, a chilling realization washed over him. He was too late. It was Roderick, along with all the men who had recently vanished. Meanwhile, in Joseph's tent, he sat absorbed in his reading, oblivious to the chaos outside. The sudden sound of shouting broke his concentration, prompting him to wonder what was unfolding. Just then, a chubby knight burst in, breathless and flustered. Joseph, curious, inquired about the commotion, but the knight could only shake his head in confusion. He rushed in, drawn by the commotion. The prince scolded him for being unaware of the situation and for neglecting his sword, declaring it worthy of hanging. Gordon offered a quick apology. Just then, the church members entered the tent. Joseph inquired about the chaos, and Andrea explained that something sinister was attacking. He revealed the Holy Bible, its sacred ink revealing trembling letters. The prince, concerned, asked if there was anything that could be done. Andrea replied that he wasn't an exorcist. While he would attempt to wield sacred power for defense, he admitted that the creature was far stronger than he could manage. A chill ran through the prince. The only powerful knight who could help was absent. The priest and the 3 men before him were his only options. He commanded them to move. As he stepped outside, an unsettling sight greeted him. People were writhing on the ground, lost in a frenzy of madness. He quickly covered his mouth and urged everyone around him to do the same. The mist hung thick in the air, casting an eerie illusion over the scene. The prince sensed that someone had orchestrated his surprise, leaving them all unprepared. A chilling tension filled the air as a woman called out for her child standing just beside the tent, her voice laced with worry. The prince's group froze in place, their hearts racing. Suddenly, she turned to him, her eyes searching, and asked, "Is it you?" Upon seeing Joseph, she declared that she had finally found her son. As she approached with a menacing hand, a radiant light intervened, blocking her advance. The boy and Andrea began to pray, seeking protection for their surroundings. Joseph, recognizing the threat, realized that only Zaire stood a chance against this monster. The other 2 knights, despite their extraordinary blessing from the priest, were simply outmatched. The monster relentlessly pounded against the barrier, and the prince realized with a sinking feeling that it was a deadly curse, aimed directly at him. The real challenge lay in uncovering the identity of the one who had cast it. As Jin began to cough up blood, Andrea urged him to hold on, knowing that if he faltered, the barrier would collapse. The monster's hand began to breach the light, but as Jin continued to pray, it was pushed back once more. Joseph understood that the priest's strength was waning. Once the boy's energy was depleted, their fate would be sealed. With the way things were going, he doubted they could hold out until sunrise. Just then, something caught his eye. Vlad stealthily approached the monster from behind. As it turned to react, he brandished a blade of aura. Earlier, the mysterious voice had informed him that a regular sword wouldn't be effective against a curse. When he asked for guidance, the voice inquired if he knew how to harness aura. Naturally, he admitted he didn't, prompting her to suggest a method they could attempt together. She could seize control of his body for a few fleeting seconds. When Vlad inquired if this was feasible, she replied that she understood how to harness aura. She could attempt to trigger its activation within him, but warned that he would be paralyzed afterward. The voice cautioned that this was their only option, though she didn't recommend it. Vlad, undeterred, explained that doing nothing would lead to his demise regardless. As he drew his blade, the voice declared that this was the path of a warrior. He expressed his desire to go through with it, and she questioned his certainty. He replied that he had made a promise to Joseph and had something important to fulfill. He assured Joseph that he could be counted on. Now, standing before the monster, it let out a terrifying scream, ready to attack. In that instant, his body went rigid as the voice commanded him to close his right eye. Suddenly, he was engulfed in a tempest of lightning, the realm of that voice. When he opened his eye, he saw the blade crackling with electricity. The monster let out a piercing scream, but Vlad remained unfazed, delivering a precise cut down the center. The priest, the stout knight, and Joseph were bewildered by the sudden turn of events. Vlad, overwhelmed, lost all his strength and fell to his knees, racked with agony. Joseph shouted out to him as Vlad struggled to crawl forward. The prince was convinced he had witnessed a manifestation of an aura. He couldn't fathom how the boy had achieved it, but one thing was evident: he was paying a heavy price. Despite its missing leg, the creature relentlessly called out for its child, inching closer to Vlad. Joseph sprinted toward him, urging the others to keep praying. He hoisted Vlad onto his shoulder, instructing him to hold on tight. Just then, the creature seized Joseph's leg, and a dark curse seemed to take hold. Joseph seethed with anger at himself for failing to escape the monster's grasp. Just then, a hand clutched his cloak. It was Borden, who quickly apologized for his earlier insolence and hurled both of them away from the creature. As they tumbled to the ground beside the priest, the monster loomed ominously over Borden. In that moment, Joseph felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for having Borden by his side. Vlad grasped his sword tightly and turned to Father Andrea, requesting a blessing to empower him in sending the monster to the underworld. The priest nodded solemnly, anointing the blade with blood as he proclaimed it, now bore the blessing of certain victory. Grateful, Vlad set off toward the creature. On the ground, it writhed in agony, pleading for someone to find her child. For a brief moment, Vlad glimpsed a fragment of her life. He saw women imprisoned deep within a dungeon, their children abandoned to perish on the cold stone floor before them. From inside her cell, one mother desperately pleaded for the return of her child. Vlad then declared that she could finally rest in peace, but her thoughts were consumed with worry for her child. With that, he plunged the sword into her, and she cried out in anguish, desperately asking where her sweet child was. Meanwhile, a summoner was smiling, but his expression shifted as he suddenly felt his curse break. Confused, he pondered how the connection had been severed. He realized that the only knight with an aura wasn't at the camp, so he had taken it upon himself to eliminate the creature. Just then, Zayar appeared, announcing that he had located the bastard behind the puppet strings. The following day, Joseph sought confirmation, asking if Zayar was certain. Zayar replied, almost convinced, and revealed a box he was holding. Inside, he claimed, lay either the source of the curse or the child the woman had been desperately searching for. Joseph suggested they leave the investigation in the hands of the priest. Ultimately, however, their expedition had been a complete failure. Zayar offered his apologies, but Joseph reassured him that the journey back would prove to be very rewarding. The knight inquired if Joseph had seen potential in the recruit. With a smile, Joseph replied that he had discovered someone worthy of fighting for his name. That child, he believed, would shine brighter than any swordsman the world had ever known. 3 days later, Vlad awoke feeling utterly drained. A voice cautioned him to be more careful, reminding him that this was the price for using her world. To his surprise, he realized they were still at the camp. He had expected to be tossed into the back of a truck like a piece of luggage. The sword chimed in, noting that they were waiting for him and that Joseph appeared quite worried. With that, he stepped out of the tent and noticed an unusual silence enveloping the camp. Suddenly, Got approached, beaming with joy, exclaiming that he thought he was going to die. Vlad raised an eyebrow, impressed that Got was still standing. Got explained that the guys had raised their salaries until they returned. He then reminisced about how he had brought Vlad here before riding back on horseback to fetch the others. Vlad assured him it was fine and promised to inform the others later. Got then instructed him to head to Joseph's tent as soon as he woke up. With that, he departed, telling the irritating guy to be quiet. Inside Joseph's tent, he poured a glass of wine and asked Vlad if he knew how to drink it. Vlad replied confidently, "Of course, I've spent enough time in a brothel to know my way around the drink." However, he had never experienced anything quite as extravagant as that. Joseph explained that such luxuries were typically reserved for nobles, and he wanted to express his gratitude to Vlad for saving his life instead of fleeing to save himself. Vlad clarified that his actions were driven by the agreement they had made. Joseph nodded in agreement, noting that their bond was built on trust rather than mere loyalty. The prince pondered how the boy adhered to their pact without even needing to sign anything. He couldn't afford to lose such talent. He had to do everything in his power to keep him close. Joseph then declared it was time to honor their agreement, announcing that, as compensation for his actions, he would officially invite him to join the Vezid family. The scene shifted to Varna, the territory of Count Vezid. Zayar explained that he had already dismissed the mercenaries, but Joseph insisted they should remain for at least one more day. Zayar caught sight of Vlad scanning the surroundings and asked if it was his first time in Varna. Vlad admitted it was his first venture beyond Skora. Naturally, Zayar teased him, calling him a country bumpkin. As they parted ways, Zayar reminded him that today was his chance to explore the city. But with a serious tone, he warned Vlad not to stir up any trouble and to return before sunset. Vlad was growing weary of the insults, but the voice hinted that Zayar seemed to have a liking for him as well. With a smirk, Vlad remarked that given the generous pay he was receiving, it was time to treat himself to something nice. Just then, someone seized him from behind. It was Jin. Vlad raised an eyebrow and asked what he wanted. Jin replied that if Vlad wasn't too busy, Father Andrea would like to see him. Vlad stood before a colossal church, his eyes wide with wonder. Not even the entire city of Skora has a church this big, he marveled. Jin smiled, explaining that while Osterma was the capital of Vezid County, Varna held the title of the religious center. "Go on in," he urged Vlad. "I'll call Father Andrea." As Vlad stepped inside, he was struck by the sheer grandeur of the interior. The church glowed with a serene light, and Lyman, known as the worshipper, couldn't help but reflect on the irony he had never truly prayed in his life. In many ways, he felt like a sinner. Just then, Andrea arrived, offering a sincere apology for keeping him waiting. Vlad dismissed the concern with a wave, expressing his gratitude for the invitation. Andrea handed Vlad an identification badge, leaving him momentarily puzzled. "This is your ID," he explained. "You could get one from Joseph himself, but those issued by the church carry more weight. After all, faith resonates across the entire continent." Vlad's eyes widened in admiration as he noticed Father Andrea's name listed as his sponsor. With a reassuring smile, Andrea placed a hand on Vlad's shoulder. "Remember, you can come to me whenever you need anything." From that day on, he would receive all the support he could ever need. The boy who had never even been registered at birth now had one of the church's most prominent figures as his sponsor. No longer was he just Vlad from the slums. He was now Vlad from Skora. The county of Vedja boasted 3 cities and 12 villages, each a testament to the life he was about to embrace. Skora served as the bustling trading hub, while Varna stood as the revered center of religion, and at the heart of it all lay the capital, Sutramana. As they made their way to the mansion, Zaire leaned in to remind Vlad that he was now a guest of Prince Joseph. Any foolishness on your part could tarnish the prince's honor, he cautioned. Reaching the door, Zaire turned to Vlad and Got, his expression serious. Remember, don't act like country bumpkins. They nodded in understanding as he informed them that some maids would soon bring drinks. However, he cautioned them against eating or drinking anything. Just watch, he insisted. Otherwise, everyone would see how they devoured their food like a pack of ravenous pigs. Vlad hesitated, asking if they couldn't at least take a small bite, but Zaire quickly shut him down, urging him not to touch anything. With that, they stepped into the room, an opulent space that radiated luxury. Even Vlad was taken aback by the unexpected turn of events. Just then, a voice emerged from behind the curtain, claiming not to recognize the 2 figures before him. The man stepped forward, revealing that he had intended to remain hidden for some time. He then inquired about their identities. Vlad's heart raced. The man bore a striking resemblance to Joseph, yet it was evident he was a far more formidable warrior. Got introduced himself, revealing that he had served alongside Joseph during the last expedition. Curiously, he inquired about the boy standing beside him. Vlad stepped forward, introducing himself as Vlad from Skora. Got stared at him, clearly impressed, admitting he had never heard of the young man before. Yet, he could see in Vlad's eyes that he had endured much and showed no signs of intimidation. It appeared that Joseph had indeed found a promising recruit. The man reached into his pocket, pulled out a handful of peanuts, and offered them to Vlad. Vlad hesitated, recalling the warning they had received about not eating anything while there. Got's eyes widened in shock, but Vlad quickly clarified that they truly couldn't accept any food. Poor Got looked terrified, fully aware of the significance of the man before them. Refusing an offer like this was no small matter. The man felt a twinge of awkwardness, puzzled by Vlad's rejection. After all, Vlad was the first son of the Count and a rival to Joseph Rector Vasid. Meanwhile, Joseph was busy penning a letter to his father, discussing the boy and the implications of his refusal. He mentioned that aside from Zaire, whom he had received from his mother, he hadn't brought any other promising soldiers. He added that if he could transform this boy into a respectable soldier for the Vasid house, a generous reward would await him. Joseph expressed his gratitude, but his father cautioned him that while his strength might not lie in combat, he must never forget that he was a member of the Vasid family. Joseph nodded, signaling that he understood. His father then inquired about his feelings, to which Joseph replied that he was fine. With a gentle nod, his father permitted him to leave. As Joseph stepped away, it became apparent that he struggled to move one of his legs. Concerned, his father instructed someone to fetch medicine for him. The man beside him assured his father that he would speak with Miss Oksana. The father commented that she was spoiling her son far too much. Turning to Ragmus, the man beside him, he inquired about his thoughts on Joseph's remarks. Ragmus agreed, noting that the numerous strange occurrences certainly supported that claim. The Count then asserted that they needed to uncover the source of these disturbances, as it was clearly a direct assault on their household. Ragmus added that the church in Varna had reported a sophisticated attack involving necromantic curses. Such a feat could only be accomplished by an exceptionally powerful dark mage, or perhaps a coven of them. The father pondered the possibility of an organization lurking in the shadows, orchestrating this chaos. Yet, even if they uncovered the truth, he realized there was little they could do at this moment. The Vasid family resolved to remain steadfast, ready to confront anyone who dared challenge them. However, their leader urged them to locate their enemies swiftly. No one could be spared after threatening his son's life and sowing chaos in their land. As dusk settled, Joseph gathered with Got and another family member. He informed Got that he would receive a reward the following day and instructed him to speak with one of the servants about finding a room. With that, he excused himself and took a seat. Turning to Vlad, he said they needed to have a brief conversation. Vlad had saved his life and pledged to become a warrior from that moment on. "Is that correct?" he asked. Vlad nodded in affirmation. Joseph then inquired if Vlad's aspirations required a measure of freedom. Vlad agreed. The prince raised an eyebrow, questioning how he could serve as a swordsman while also seeking freedom. If that were the case, he needed to understand why he craved that freedom. If Vlad could reveal this, they might reach an agreement that granted him the liberation he sought. After a brief silence, Vlad asked Joseph if he knew a man named Godin de Gatar, the Knight of the Moonlight. Joseph found it odd that Vlad was familiar with such a name and inquired if the enigmatic knight who had attacked the Smiling Rose was indeed Godin de Gatar. Vlad had not forgotten him for a single moment. This was the man who had killed the one who saved him and shattered the world he once knew. Yet, despite that, Vlad vowed to become like his savior. When he confided in Joseph, he was met with disappointing news. Joseph regrettably informed him that he could not assist. Godin was beyond the reach of his influence. The weight of this revelation cast a shadow over Vlad's expression, deepening his sadness. However, this was something he had anticipated, as Joseph was merely the Count's son. The prince responded by suggesting they revise their agreement. He proposed a 7-year contract for Vlad to serve Shura. Vlad appeared puzzled, prompting Joseph to clarify that he had relinquished all the dignity and pride associated with nobility. Though Vlad didn't fully grasp the implications, he sensed it was significant to his family. The prince explained that in exchange for saving him, he would provide food and training for the next 7 years, enough for Vlad to become a knight on par with the best in the world. The mention of Kang Knight piqued Vlad's interest. However, the prince made it clear that in return, Vlad would need to swear loyalty and adhere strictly to his commands. It was evident that he would be unable to act against Godin during this time. He would have the authority to handle matters concerning the slums of Shura. Additionally, he would assist in locating a girl named Jamina, who resided in the convent. He cautioned that in this world, there are dangers far more perilous than simply entering the slums armed with a sword. As a prince, he possessed other, more subtle weapons at his disposal. He then turned to Vlad, inquiring about his thoughts on this offer. Moments later, Joseph expressed his admiration for Vlad's ambitions. Zayar, puzzled, questioned why Joseph was so invested in the boy, pointing out that there were many other talented youths around. Joseph nodded in agreement, acknowledging that every young person holds a unique potential within them. However, he added, the true challenge lies in whether they will cultivate that talent. Zayar then asked if Joseph genuinely believed the boy could rise to meet those expectations. The prince confidently replied that he was certain. He had witnessed the boy's potential firsthand. Zayar, however, cautioned him that the boy was highly unpredictable, rebellious, and would not be easy to train. Joseph smiled, assuring Zayar that this was precisely why he had him by his side. 7 years was no small span of time. It should be ample opportunity to tame the wild spirit. With a resigned nod, Zayar promised he would at least give it his best effort. Joseph expressed his gratitude, remarking that the wilder a horse, the more impressive it was to tame. At least, that was his belief. In truth, the boy was like a wolf chasing the moon. The following day, Zayar led him to the room where he would be staying. Vlad, eyes wide with wonder, asked if all of this truly belonged to him. Zayar gently reminded him, "You're still just a kid from the slums." While most squires struggled to adapt due to their privileged backgrounds, Zayar had a different concern for Vlad. He cautioned him against causing any trouble. When Vlad inquired whether turning down Rudder's offers would be an issue, Zayar shrugged it off, insisting it wouldn't matter since he had no intention of complying. However, he instructed Vlad to head to the training field after finishing his meal. They would train in the morning and afternoon, just as they had during the expedition. At that moment, Zayar's attention was drawn to a woman with striking green hair who declared him her loyal knight. He introduced her as Miss Oksana, Joseph's mother. They exchanged greetings, and she inquired if this was the boy. Zayar confirmed, nodding. Yes, he is the one chosen by Joseph. She gazed at Vlad, who met her eyes with a fleeting glance. The sight of her radiant presence made him feel a rush of embarrassment. What was he doing, staring at the mother of the man who had hired him? She expressed her gratitude, saying she had heard about how he saved her son. Blushing, Vlad stammered that he was merely doing his job, but she insisted he deserved a grand reward, for his service had been beyond anything she could have imagined. She remarked on how his hair beautifully complemented his blue eyes, and noted his broad shoulders, even though he was quite thin. I'll need to make some clothes for you, she added with a smile. Vlad, feeling a bit embarrassed, expressed his gratitude. With a final smile, she left, reminding Zayar to get back to work, to which he replied with a thankful nod. Vlad's awkwardness lingered, prompting Zayar to inquire about it. He had never witnessed the boy behave this way before. Vlad shrugged, admitting he didn't know why he felt that way. He had simply never encountered a noblewoman before. Zayar chuckled, suggesting that perhaps it wasn't so terrible for a first encounter, adding that he still felt a twinge of embarrassment every time he saw her. With a grin, he announced it was time to eat. The scene shifted to the bustling cafeteria, where Vlad sat alone at a table. Suddenly, a guy leaned over and spat into his plate, only to quickly apologize, claiming he mistook Vlad for a trash can. Laughter erupted from the other squires around them. Vlad remained silent, calmly scooping the saliva out with a spoon and tossing it aside. He resumed eating, surprised at how quickly he could brush off the incident. The others found it odd that he remained so composed. He recalled Zaire's warning that every action he took would directly impact Zeus's reputation. Now he had to devise a way to teach these guys a lesson, without sullying the prince's honor. As they stormed off, they declared he would soon learn his place. Vlad then turned to him and asked, "What's your name?" Vlad found the situation peculiar and pressed the squire for his name once more. Intimidated and slightly embarrassed, the young man replied, "Solonin." Rising to his feet, Vlad nodded and declared he would remember that name. Later that morning, the count strolled through the castle, keenly observing the new squire as he practiced. He stared intently and asked if that was the boy. Vlad, with his striking blue eyes and golden hair, certainly appeared respectable. Ragnos urged him to focus. Meanwhile, hidden in the shadows, someone was watching closely. It was Zaire, eager to see how the new recruit would perform. The father believed that if Zaire showed interest, he should witness the boy's actions firsthand. Vlad took a swing, and the opponent quickly defended himself. Undeterred, Vlad launched a series of strikes, causing the man to lose his balance and narrowly avoid a blow to the face. Ragnos observed, "It seems the boy has no fear." While the father found Vlad somewhat awkward, he couldn't deny the flicker of potential within him. As Vlad engaged in battle, he recalled everything the voice had taught him. Fencing always begins with footwork. Once in position, you mislead your opponent with subtle movements of your shoulder and eyes. Just when they think they've read your intentions, you strike with an unexpected maneuver. The opponent swung and missed, falling for the ruse. Vlad sidestepped, closing the distance to his opponent, and delivered a powerful blow to the chest. The man crumpled to his knees, gasping that he had expected Vlad to strike from the left, but Vlad wasn't done. He seized the man by the hair, his voice low and menacing. "Aren't you one of Solonin's lackeys? I could have sworn I saw you laughing at breakfast." "It's time for you to laugh a little more," Vlad declared, delivering a punch squarely to the middle of his opponent's nose. The other squires gasped in disbelief at the sudden turn of events. Ragnos turned to the count, questioning whether such brutal fighting was truly appropriate. The count replied, "In the end, a knight must possess a strong heart." Meanwhile, from a distance, Zaire appeared to be shining with a strange, unsettling light. Another squire rushed in, urging Vlad to stop, warning that things would escalate if he didn't let go. With a sigh, Vlad released the boy, letting him crumple to the ground. "Sorry, I got a bit carried away," he said, watching as others hurried to assist the fallen squire. Turning his attention to Solonin, he added, "Make sure to apologize for me when he wakes up." Solonin's anger flared as Vlad walked by. "I'd like to apologize in advance," he called out, a hint of sarcasm in his voice. "But if the soup is bland again, I'll be sure to summon you." Solonin couldn't shake the feeling that the kid was a psychopath. Meanwhile, Zaire had brought a wild dog from the slums, adding an unexpected twist to the day. In the next scene, Gott chimed in, "I heard you've been giving the other squires a hard time." Vlad brushed off the comment, his focus shifting. "Are you enjoying your work in the stable?" he asked, genuinely curious. Gott confirmed that he was indeed at the Vyazid house stable, a place of significance. However, he quickly redirected the conversation, reminding Vlad that violence was a crime in the state. Vlad shrugged it off, insisting it didn't matter. In his eyes, he had shown restraint. After all, he only struck the man who had been training against him, and it was that man who had provoked him first. Vlad declared it was for the best. That way, none of those spoiled nobles would bother him. Just then, a chubby boy approached and introduced himself as Portly. Vlad regarded him with a piercing gaze and asked what he wanted. Taken aback, Portly hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Vlad, growing impatient, told him to either sit down or leave. To his surprise, Portly beamed and took a seat, oblivious to the fact that Vlad had only wanted to rid himself of the interruption. Feeling embarrassed, Portly admitted that he always had to eat alone, which was why he wanted to join their group. Vlad, not in the mood for chatter, told him to talk less and focus on his meal. Portly then mentioned that the sausage he was enjoying came from his father's livestock, raised for generations. If Vlad liked sausages, he could easily get more from his family. Vlad raised an eyebrow and asked, "Are you really trying to win me over with sausage?" In the next scene, they made their way to Portly's stash, a treasure trove brimming with food. Vlad suddenly remembered that many of the squires hailed from affluent families. Perhaps it was time to start forging some connections. He turned to Portly and asked if he'd like to share meals together from now on. The chubby boy's face lit up with joy as he eagerly asked if Vlad was serious. "Of course," Vlad replied with a smile. "Squires have to stick together." It wasn't just about the sausage. Oh boy. Zaire was utterly exhausted from training Vlad twice a day and assisting Joseph. Just then, a voice called out to him, asking if they could talk. Zaire turned to see Mr. Gregory and greeted him, curious about the reason for his visit. Gregory, with a hint of amusement, urged him not to appear so dissatisfied at his arrival. Zaire replied, "I'm just very busy right now." Gregory chuckled, but Zaire urged him to cut to the chase. "Now that I have the chance to train a promising squire," Gregory began, a glint of excitement in his eyes. Zaire quickly interjected, reminding him to concentrate on his own training first. Gregory shrugged, insisting he had done well enough with his own. "Look at Portly, he's mine, and quite the chubby little fellow now," he said with a grin. Then, with a thoughtful expression, he added, "But Vlad, he seems to have real potential. He doesn't strike me as the type to let anyone get under his skin." Zaire urged him to speak his mind. Blushing with embarrassment, Gregory mentioned that Vlad and Portly appeared to be forming a friendship. Zaire scoffed, declaring that such a thing was impossible. Vlad held himself in too high regard to make friends. Gregory then confessed that he hoped Vlad would stand up for Portly. He explained that Portly was the son of his cousin and had been enduring a great deal of hardship lately. Zaire raised an eyebrow, questioning if Gregory truly expected this to be free. Gregory replied that if he went through with it, Zaire would owe him a favor in return. Zaire shrugged, admitting he would give it a shot, but the boy often tuned him out. Gregory smiled, saying that was actually a good thing. Zaire sighed, clarifying that he meant Vlad really didn't pay attention to anything he said. Gregory commented that Vlad was destined for great things. Meanwhile, at the stable, God expressed his confusion. The horses were well trained, yet none seemed to accept Vlad. It wasn't that he lacked riding skills, it was simply that they shunned him. Vlad couldn't help but reflect on his life. Every dog or cat had always scurried away the moment they spotted him. He recalled that day at the lake, where he remained on the horse while God worked to tame it. God had mentioned that the horse belonged to Zaire and was worth a small fortune. Vlad found himself at a loss for words. How could he possibly tell the prince that he could only accept a horse if it came with a hefty price tag? Just then, a woman approached, interrupting his thoughts. "Miss Oksana would like to speak with you," she said, drawing Vlad's attention away from his dilemma. He didn't fully grasp the situation, but simply replied that he was on his way. Meanwhile, in another part of the castle, Oksana remarked that anyone who saw him would never believe he had grown up in the slums. The clothes suited him well, yet the boy appeared stiff and awkward. Turning to the man beside her, she added that his clothes shouldn't be so tight. At 17, he still had plenty of time to grow. In response, she arranged for new clothes for him, including summer attire. Vlad simply thanked her, choosing not to say more. She smiled and insisted that it was she who should be grateful for his bravery in saving her son. Apologizing for taking up his time, she encouraged him to return to his training. Our young protagonist expressed his gratitude and stepped outside, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. He often found it difficult to converse with older women, his nerves making him feel as though he might suffocate from holding his breath. As he glanced at her attire, he realized the fabric was incredibly luxurious, far beyond anything he had ever worn. It was a stark contrast to his previous life in the slums, where even the simplest garments felt like a distant dream. As he walked down the corridor, he reflected on his efforts to adapt to this place. Yet the sense of not belonging only grew stronger, weighing heavily on him. Just as he was about to glance out the window, a commotion caught his attention. A crowd had gathered below, where one boy was mercilessly attacking another, hurling insults like, "Stinky fatso." With another punch, he taunted that just because they had offered him a truce, it didn't mean he had stopped being a loser. Portly felt powerless as the guy continued to berate him, insisting he was still the same trash, even with his new friend by his side. I half expected Vlad to intervene, but he remained at the window, lost in thought about how people never really changed, no matter where he found himself. In a world where the less fortunate often face the cruelty of those who sought to elevate themselves by preying on the weak, he tossed his old clothes over his shoulder with a resigned sigh. "Looks like you'll be wearing these again," he remarked, a hint of bitterness in his voice. Later that night, he approached a door and knocked. A voice called out asking who it was. "It's Vlad," he replied, the weight of the evening heavy on his shoulders. Portly opened the door, and our protagonist stared at him in surprise. His friend was bruised and looked a bit out of sorts. Concerned, he asked why Vlad was visiting so late. Vlad simply replied that he had come to deliver one important message. He wanted him to take it. Portly glanced down and realized Vlad was referring to a hefty chunk of ham. "Are you sure you want to give me all of this?" he asked, astonished. Vlad had just agreed, and in that moment, his friend bowed his head, feeling foolish for believing that Vlad was truly his friend. In the end, he was just another person who viewed him as an easy source of food. Yet, despite the sting of betrayal, it was still better than eating alone, so he accepted it from Vlad. With a hint of reassurance, Vlad told Portly not to be too upset, insisting that this was merely compensation. The chubby boy stood bewildered, struggling to grasp the situation. Vlad recalled a lesson from a knight. A true knight only accepts something if it's exchanged for a fair price. Now he found himself facing the very group that had mercilessly beaten Portly. It was 14 against 1, and he couldn't help but remark that even the toughest kids from the slums wouldn't stoop to such cowardice. But one of the thugs merely sneered, telling him to be quiet, and ominously warned that today his bravado would be shattered. With a casual flick of his finger, our boy beckoned them forward, urging them to come at him already. After all, he didn't have all night. Anger flared in the eyes of one of the attackers, and in an instant, everyone charged at him. Yet Vlad couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. He had successfully changed his clothes. Tonight, there would be blood everywhere. The first two who lunged at him were met with swift strikes to the cheek and head. Their friends watched as the unfortunate souls fell like discarded trash, utterly outmatched. But before anyone could react, Vlad surged forward and landed a solid punch on another guy's jaw. The fool's confidence evaporated as he realized Vlad was nothing like the inexperienced fighter he had trained against. It was clear now that Vlad had transformed since those early days of learning swordsmanship, something that should have been impossible. With a commanding shout, he ordered everyone to attack, declaring their intent to kill the man before them. But before he could finish his sentence, Vlad was already beneath him, asking if he had ever truly felt the sensation of death. The man swung at him, demanding that Vlad stop fooling around, clearly frustrated by his effortless dodging. As they faced off, a voice echoed in the air, noting that the results of Vlad's training with Zayar were finally beginning to manifest. With a flurry of strikes, his opponent found himself pinned in place. Though he attempted to retaliate, each effort was met with a precise blow to the shoulder. Meanwhile, Vlad began to grasp what Zayar had meant about creating his own space. Seizing the moment, he delivered a powerful strike to his opponent's back, and the fool crumpled to the ground like discarded refuse. Just as the man braced for the worst, Vlad charged in, delivering a swift strike to his face. The poor guy was trembling, tears of fear streaming down his cheeks. But it was clear that Vlad had no intention of holding back. The blow landed hard, and the rest of the group watched in tense silence. Their breaths held. It was a near miss, just barely avoiding a direct hit to his head. Vlad issued a stern warning. They had better stay out of his sight and leave the friendly guy alone. The man, tears streaming down his face, could only muster a shaky okay. It had been a close call. Vlad had nearly crossed a line. With a smirk, Vlad declared that should suffice as payment for the ham. Now, it was time to move on. He looked around, asking who was next in line. The boy stood frozen in fear, paralyzed by the tension in the air. But then, Vlad felt a surge of inspiration. "If you're not going to come at me," he declared boldly, "then I'll come for you." He began to stride confidently toward the trembling group, and it was clear he was ready to take them all on. Meanwhile, the Baron of the house observed the unfolding drama with an unsettling calm, his gaze fixed on the scene before him. As he watched everyone being beaten down, he couldn't help but admire the boy's impressive resilience. The scene shifted to a grand hall the following day, where the monthly meeting of all the knights was set to take place. Though unspoken, the room was clearly divided. Rucker's supporters stood on one side, while Joseph's allies gathered on the other, with a few neutrals caught in between. Talas, the commander of the knights, addressed the assembly, announcing that the meeting would be postponed due to the absence of Rucker's faction. As they prepared to move on to the next item on the agenda, the distribution of relics sent by the church, the lord of the territory quietly observed the palpable tension in the room. Rucker's knights seethed with fury, while those loyal to Joseph appeared remarkably at ease. To him, this was no surprise. After all, Joseph's knights had long lived in the shadow of Rucker's. He cast a glance at Zaire, who was left wondering if the Count was actually smiling at him. Eventually, the meeting came to a close, and everyone was expected to review their missions. As the knights began to disperse, whispers floated behind Zayar's back, suggesting that it seemed as though someone had brought a stray dog into their midst. He glanced over with a calm smile, only to see the anger in the eyes of the others intensify. One of them stormed off, muttering that there must be some hidden reason for him to accept a squire like that. Just then, a man approached from behind, remarking that everyone was buzzing about the incident. Zayar feigned ignorance, but the man insisted that the news had spread like wildfire. Vlad had gotten into such a massive brawl with the other squires that it was becoming increasingly difficult to keep it under wraps. It seemed that Zayar was completely unaware of the situation, and he couldn't help but think that this kid was quite a handful. Nevertheless, the man expressed his gratitude to Zayar, acknowledging that he had honored the bet and now owed him a favor. With a nod, he turned to leave, promising to remember this moment. He felt a swell of pride for what Vlad had accomplished, though he couldn't say he was entirely surprised after all. He was the one who had trained the boy. In a dimly lit room, a suit of armor was unveiled, and the presenter announced that it had been sent to Vlad as a gift. To everyone's surprise, it was from the Count himself. Borden's eyes widened in admiration. It was indeed rare for a squire to receive such a remarkable offering. Zayar chimed in, noting that the armor was crafted from exceptional workhide, renowned for its durability. This material came from a formidable monster native to the northern region, a creature notoriously difficult to confront. Joseph realized that in the brief time Vlad had been with them, he had already earned his father's respect. Zayar had brought up the recent fight, noting how none of the squires had stood a chance against Vlad, and now the entire camp was buzzing with the news. Seizing the moment, Joseph lifted a letter and declared that it was no time to linger. Inside was their next step forward. Zayar glanced at the invitation and remarked that such a thing was quite rare. His friend, however, was more interested in whether he would accept it. Without hesitation, Zayar agreed, admitting he was utterly exhausted from caring for his child. They shook on it, and just like that, the deal was sealed. He was bound for the region of Dermar. With the sun shining bright and the sky a brilliant blue, he settled into the carriage, realizing that Vlad would be joining him on this journey as well. Joseph explained that they were heading to a region abundant with fruit, which also served as a direct route to the central area. This connection was vital for them, especially since they were situated in the north. Curious, our boy asked if that was the reason Zayar was also traveling there. Joseph nodded, elaborating that crises often present opportunities, even for those not directly involved. House Heinel was embroiled in a bitter succession dispute, with one contender seeking assistance. Vlad remarked on the complexities of the noble world, hinting at the tangled web of alliances and rivalries. Joseph succinctly summarized the situation. They were battling for control over all of Dermar, a clear indication of the internal strife at play. The rightful heir to that land was none other than Alicia Heinel. However, her uncle Ender was determined to convince everyone that she was the product of an illegitimate relationship. His motive was clear. If he could eliminate her from the succession dispute, he would automatically ascend to the throne and claim the title of Baron. Despite being the true heir, Alicia found herself with few supporters, and her status as a woman in a house of knights only complicated her position further. That's why a competition was set to take place, one where she would need to prove her legitimacy. Joseph recognized that his family's connection to hers was tenuous at best, yet it was sufficient for him to stand in her defense. He explained that this was their opportunity to earn favor from her house, and to his relief, his father concurred. Vlad quickly grasped the reason behind Zayar's participation. It was clear that the head of the house had personally summoned him to defend their honor. Zayar quickly caught Vlad's lingering gaze and advised him not to stare so intently. Curious, Vlad asked what the issue was. Zayar replied that it felt odd for a squire to be lounging comfortably in the carriage while he remained outside. Vlad, a hint of embarrassment coloring his cheeks, apologized, admitting that he felt quite awkward about the whole situation. It was clear that our boy still lacked a horse of his own, and Zayar couldn't help but find it absurd that he could take on a group of squires, yet still harbor a fear of horses. Our boy attempted to mumble that the issue lay with the horses, not him, and he was convinced that if he had a more expensive one, things might turn out differently. But Zayar swiftly reprimanded him, pointing out that the horses he needed were worth far more than he was. Suddenly, Vlad felt an unsettling sensation. His heart raced, and he couldn't help but wonder if it was the result of Zayar's scolding. It seemed plausible, even if it didn't entirely make sense. Meanwhile, Joseph continued to ramble on about topics that flew over Vlad's head, while Zayar relentlessly lectured him, leaving him feeling overwhelmed. Suddenly, an unsettling sensation washed over him, and the ground began to tremble. Borden remarked that the earth felt peculiar, and then the shaking intensified. Zayar quickly commanded everyone to dismount their horses, and the men complied without hesitation. In that moment, our protagonist sprang into action, flinging open the carriage door and pulling Joseph out, who appeared momentarily bewildered by the sudden turn of events. Joseph reassured him, expressing gratitude for the concern, but insisting there was no need to panic. Borden, still on the ground, noted that whatever it was seemed to have moved on. Vlad chimed in, mentioning it was his first encounter with an earthquake. However, Joseph quickly clarified that it wasn't an earthquake at all. As they gazed into the distance, they could see evidence of something having swept through the area. The forest floor lay in complete disarray, a testament to the passage of a colossal death worm, an eerie remnant of a long-fallen dragon. Vlad's initial shock quickly transformed into a grin as he marveled at the creature's magnificence. Moments later, they approached the bustling town of Durmar, anticipation hanging in the air. They came to a halt in front of an inn, where Joseph informed him that he was free to do as he pleased for the time being. He could take leisurely walks, explore the city, gather information, or pursue any other interests. However, Vlad felt a bit bewildered, unsure of his purpose for being there. Sensing his confusion, Joseph inquired if something was wrong. Vlad quickly shook his head, replying that he might just look for something to occupy his time. The prince urged him to reflect on why he had been summoned. It wasn't every day one had the chance to witness a dual honor, especially a group battle featuring individuals from such prestigious families. Joseph realized he was there not just to observe, but to learn. He intended to train Vlad as effectively as possible, and this was the perfect opportunity to do just that. In that moment, Zaire warned him not to get into trouble out there since they had training in the morning. Vlad shot him a glance and replied, "I'm not that much of an idiot." Yet it was clear the trainer had little faith in him. As they parted ways, Zaire cautioned him not to do anything too suspicious. Left alone, Vlad suddenly felt the weight of his free time. It had been so long since he'd had any, and now he found himself at a loss for what to do. As he wandered through the area, he realized that everything was much smaller than he had anticipated. The surroundings appeared worn and neglected, as if they had long been forgotten. Perhaps business had been struggling. Just then, his sword trembled, whispering that it recognized this place, or at least the tree atop that hill. Vlad mentioned that he had discovered a perfect spot for prayer. For someone who didn't consider himself religious, he certainly spent a lot of time in prayer. He explained to his companion that it always seemed to enhance his sword skills, and now he was determined to help it regain its memories. Regardless, it was time to start repaying a debt. Meanwhile, in another part of the castle, Joseph introduced himself and someone expressed gratitude for his arrival. He stated that any threat to a member of the family was a threat to him as well, so it was only natural for him to appear. Before him stood Lady Alicia. Joseph informed her that House Vezin had already given its approval. Now the decision rested in her hands. With determination, she replied that her decision was already made. She would honor the Count's wishes, provided, of course, that she emerged victorious in the duel. Joseph reassured her, stating that she had nothing to worry about. When it came to duels, House Vezin always ensured victory. As they left the meeting, Warden remarked that they should keep a close watch on the girl. She didn't strike him as foolish. Zaire added that she actually displayed leadership qualities, and Joseph admitted he was impressed she had truly held her own in court. Despite everything, his plans remained unchanged. Standing with Vlad and the sword, he reflected on how memories were often all that remained at the end of a person's life. Perhaps that was why humans were so driven to leave their mark on the world, because when those marks were revisited in the future, it felt as if the memories of that day came rushing back. Gazing at the gravestone, Vlad expressed a heartfelt wish that his mother had also been given a proper burial. He began clearing the leaves, noting that, apparently, no one had been taking much care of this place. Speaking to the sword, he explained that he was simply tidying up because it was the right thing to do. The sword appeared a bit flustered, prompting him to add that since he had come up there at its request, it should take a good look around. He then planted it into the ground, and immediately, an image began to emerge. A voice echoed, saying that memories were surfacing like bubbles rising to the water's surface. It remembered that the tree had once been much smaller, though it couldn't pinpoint when that was. Yet, it did recall being there with someone else. Suddenly, it sensed something lurking nearby, something that seemed to recognize it. Vlad, bewildered, struggled to grasp what it meant. The voice then requested to borrow his body. "Just give me a minute," he replied, closing his eyes to gather his thoughts. As soon as he opened his eyes, a brilliant flash of blue light illuminated the area. Vlad was taken aback to find a massive serpent-like creature perched atop a nearby tree, its gaze fixed intently on him. The voice echoed in his mind, revealing that it was a spirit bound to this place. In that moment, Vlad couldn't shake the feeling that he had been encountering an unsettling number of strange phenomena lately. He informed the voice that the spirit was clearly gazing directly at him. The voice replied that it was aware of its presence inside Vlad. As the creature began to descend, Vlad felt a surge of fear, but the voice reassured him that it wouldn't bite. To his surprise, despite the creature drawing nearer, Vlad realized that his body was responding with an unexpected calm. It was as if he had been infused with the vibrant energy of spring. Suddenly, a voice pierced the air behind him, demanding to know his identity. Vlad jumped in surprise, the serpent disappearing at once. The voice repeated the question, insisting he explain himself. A blue-haired girl stood before him, asserting that only members of House Heinel were permitted in this cemetery. Vlad quickly apologized, explaining that he had merely stumbled upon the place while seeking a quiet spot to pray. She appeared a bit confused, so he revealed the Vezid family token, reassuring her that there was no need for suspicion. Recognizing him as their squire, she remarked that he genuinely didn't seem to be lying. He thanked her, and an awkward silence settled between them. He couldn't shake the thought that his actions might not have been very polite, which could spell trouble if word got back to Joseph. He knew he would inevitably end up on the losing side against Zaire, as always, so he had to ensure this woman kept quiet. He asked if there was anything he could assist her with. If she was here, she was likely a member of the Heinel family, or someone responsible for maintaining the tombs. Taking advantage of his visit, he had already cleared some leaves from a few of them. She then noticed that the graves were impeccably clean. Our boy explained that it was a gesture of respect for the land's owners. He picked up a bucket and added that this courtesy extended to her as well. However, he had one small request. Please don't tell anyone she found him there. If Zaire discovered his secret, he would surely face a scolding. She let out a light laugh and replied that it was fine, but it would depend on how well he cleaned the place. Vlad felt a flicker of annoyance at this girl, who seemed to be taking advantage of his goodwill, but he chose to remain silent. Instead, he continued to clean with calm determination. She stood there, smiling, as the leaves danced away in the breeze. Meanwhile, back at the castle, the sound of sword clashing against shield echoed through the training grounds. Our protagonist watched in awe as two knights engaged in a fierce sparring match. It was a true display of skill and strength. The voice within him remarked on the sheer power behind Sir Collins's strikes, noting that a mere mortal would likely have their bones shattered if they attempted to block such formidable attacks. Our protagonist couldn't help but feel justified in earning the title of Wild Ox of the Central region. Yet, what truly captivated him was Sir Pablo, who effortlessly defended himself against his opponents. It was astonishing. With a duel scheduled for tomorrow, the intensity of their warm-up was already remarkable. Curious, he inquired if all knights possessed such skill, only to be reminded that Borden was also a knight. He realized that the men before him were truly formidable. After all this time away from Skora, he was finally beginning to understand his place in this world, and understanding that, unfortunately, revealed a long road still lay ahead. At last, the day of the great duel had arrived. Our protagonist was assisting Zaire in getting dressed, carefully tightening his right cuff as instructed. Vlad turned his gaze to the side and spotted a blue-haired man under Heinel, the very one attempting to usurp Lisha's throne. Zaire leaned in, urging him to pay close attention. Opportunities like this were few and far between. He added that, regardless of what Vlad had witnessed the day before, it was best to let it go. Vlad felt a flicker of confusion, but Zaire simply remarked that it was evident on his face. Our protagonist came to a sobering realization. The training that had once impressed him was far from extraordinary. His trainer reminded him that he was merely a beginner, with a long road ahead. He wasn't even in a position to consider running just yet. In this world, the greater one aspired to be, the longer the journey would stretch before them. Our poor boy, always learning the hard way, had just resigned himself to the moment when someone called for everyone's attention. The doors swung open, and he immediately recognized the unmistakable presence of the heir to House Heinel. Though he shouldn't have known her, our little troublemaker did. Lady Alicia Heinel was announced in the hall, her arrival commanding the room. The voice echoed in his mind, reminding him that he had just defended the tombs in front of the girl destined to inherit it all. She glided through the hall, and a heavy silence followed her. As she brushed past Vlad, there was no playful smile, only a chilling glare. In that instant, he understood that she had recognized him. But just as she moved on, a fleeting smile appeared on her lips, revealing a hint of mischief in the eyes of the husky girl. Once she took her seat on the throne, her demeanor shifted back to its icy state. That girl certainly had her mood swings. The priest then spoke, declaring that with all participants present and under his watchful gaze, he was the eyes of God and would bear witness to this duel. Vlad couldn't shake the thought that the entire region of Durmar hung in the balance. This was not just a duel of honor, it was a ruthless battle with everything on the line. There was a saying that nobles needed to possess blue blood and an icy demeanor due to the weighty decisions they faced. Unfortunately, Alicia wasn't quite ready for that. Her blood still ran red. With a fierce determination, she tossed aside the cloth and commanded him to stop. That was enough. It seemed the old man she had summoned for protection was already out of options. but he insisted it wasn't over yet. He wasn't finished. However, the church officials declared that the handkerchief had already been thrown, forcing him to concede defeat. The knight acknowledged the commander, praising the duel as admirable. Yet, the old man shook his head, lamenting that he no longer deserved the title of commander. The truth was that Lord Duncan himself had trained this man, hoping to mold him into a great knight for the realm. He had never envisioned that the talent he had cultivated would ultimately be wielded against Alicia, stripping her of her power. Then, the church official announced that the first victory belonged to Lord Ender. The men erupted in praise for Ender, declaring it a flawless outcome. Next, the duel commenced between Sir Colin and Sir Zaire, both reminded that the use of aura was strictly prohibited in this match. The battle would conclude only when one of them surrendered or could no longer continue. Zaire cast a glance at Vlad, who subtly gestured for him to focus closely. There was much to learn. In that moment, Zaire understood that today's training would unfold right before him, and the infamous wild ox of the central region was poised to impart a valuable lesson. Zaire shifted his body to the side, effortlessly dodging the first strike. He calmly observed Colin, who couldn't help but feel impressed by Zaire's agility. Undeterred, Colin launched a second attack, convinced that if he just increased his speed, he would eventually land a hit. But Zaire was ready. He leaped over the next strike and sidestepped once more, evading Colin's efforts with ease. He crouched to dodge another strike and quickly retreated across the arena. Ender, brimming with enthusiasm, exclaimed that Colin was really putting the pressure on Zaire, and that victory was all but assured. Yet, in the background, Pablo had already grasped the truth. This fight was decidedly in Zaire's favor. How could they not see it? The one most acutely aware of the situation was Colin himself, who had yet to land a single hit. The towering figure was baffled as his blade failed to make contact, while Zaire danced around him with ease, almost toying with him. Suddenly, the wild boar charged in, furious and eager to land another blow. But this time, Zaire stepped forward, a glint of determination in his eyes. A voice whispered to Vlad that this was the moment Zaire had been waiting to reveal. With a swift motion, Zaire struck the side of Colin's blade, sending it careening backward. Colin suddenly realized he had walked straight into a trap, but Zaire remained unfazed. Frustrated, Colin channeled his anger into another overhead strike. Meanwhile, the voice urged Vlad to pay attention, revealing that Zaire had deliberately directed Colin's blade upward. This clever maneuver left Colin with no choice but to execute a downward attack. This was what they called a counter, using the opponent's own attack to create an opening. Colin lay on the ground, fully aware that Zaire was on an entirely different level. No amount of training could ever bridge the gap between them. With that realization, he accepted his defeat. Alicia let out a sigh of relief as her representative was declared the winner. Ender's side clearly didn't take the news well, but Zaire maintained his composure. He approached Vlad and inquired if he had noticed anything unusual. Vlad nodded, acknowledging his observation, and expressed his gratitude. The final duel was set to be between Pablo and the purple-hair contender. As soon as his name was mentioned, a friend beside Vlad urged him to stop stating the obvious, reminding him that everyone already knew who he was. Nevertheless, Pablo announced his name for all to hear. The other man then introduced himself as Zub de Shezad. A voice in Vlad's mind noted that Alicia had truly gathered an impressive group. This sub was on a level far above Colin. Suddenly, Zub glanced over at Alicia, an unexpected look in his eyes. To her surprise, he bowed deeply. Joseph immediately recognized this gesture. It was a clear signal that someone was preparing to depart. Zub then announced that as the representative of his faction, he would not be participating in the duel. The room fell into stunned silence. Joseph had not seen this coming. Ender, however, wasted no time. He clapped his hands and proclaimed that this marked the end of it all. It was clear to everyone that the man had been bought. With a confident step forward, Ender declared himself the ruler of the land, standing boldly in the presence of God. But Joseph insisted that this was far from over. Ender countered, asserting that there was no way to reverse the situation, especially since Alicia's knight had chosen to withdraw from the duel. "How can you accept a loss like this without a fight?" Joseph challenged. The tension in the room was palpable, and everyone agreed that they needed to hear what Joseph had to say, considering he was the representative of the North. One of the men standing behind Ender leaned in and whispered a warning to be cautious. Igniting a conflict between the two regions would be disastrous. Ender turned to Joseph, inquiring about his plans to resolve the situation. The prince was acutely aware of one outcome he desperately wanted to avoid, the worst-case scenario. With a determined expression, he declared that the duels must continue to protect Lady Alicia's reputation from being tarnished. Ender agreed, but noted that they would need to find someone to take your place. This was acceptable to him, as he recognized that no other knight present could hope to defeat Pablo. Joseph then stepped forward, claiming he had someone in mind to fight and use stead. As the heir of House Howe, he had the authority to designate the next challenger for Alicia's honor. Naturally, he called upon the blonde knight. Vlad stood there, his expression a mix of confusion and disbelief, completely unaware of the unfolding situation. Ender, however, quickly objected, asserting that this was unacceptable since the challenger wasn't even a knight. Joseph countered, stating that in a duel of honor, anyone capable of wielding a sword had the right to participate. Ender pressed on, insisting it would be a disgrace for Pablo to face off against a mere squire. Joseph countered that it would be even more disgraceful for Houseway to lose a duel through underhanded tactics. He refused to accept such a ridiculous defeat, which was why he was nominating Vlad. Ender sighed, conceding to Joseph's insistence. After all, he knew that the boy was just a squire, and there was little chance of victory. Vlad, still processing the news, asked if he had heard correctly. He was to fight a real knight. Zaire simply affirmed it with a nod. Concerned, Vlad wanted reassurance about his safety. The trainer assured him not to worry. If his life were truly at risk, he would intervene personally to halt the duel. Yet, what Vlad truly longed to hear was that the fight would be called off before any danger could arise. Zaire remained silent, and Vlad clearly disliked the tension in the air. Just then, Joseph approached and wrapped his arms around Vlad in a supportive hug. Vlad protested, insisting it wasn't necessary, but Joseph was merely passing along a message. He only needed to hold on for 10 more minutes. From the very beginning, a plan had been set in motion, with instructions delivered by Borden. All he needed to do was buy time. Curious if 10 minutes would suffice, our protagonist turned to Joseph, who advised that the longer, the better. With a resigned sigh, Vlad promised to do his best, though he was reminded to be cautious. He then approached Alicia, offering her a greeting, to which she responded with a subtle nod. The two knights stood face to face, tension crackling in the air. Vlad introduced himself confidently, declaring, "I am Vlad Skora. Who else would I be?" But Pablo's fury was palpable. He hurled his shield to the ground, his voice seething with disdain. "You don't even deserve to hear my name," he spat. "You're unworthy of this fight, and your very presence dishonors the duel." Our protagonist was growing weary of the endless discussions about worthiness and rightful places in the world. Ever since leaving Skora, he had pondered why the nobles sought to hoard the beauty of the world for themselves. Yes, he was born into poverty, but that didn't mean he didn't deserve to be here. Determined not to walk away empty-handed, he turned to Pablo and asked, "How are we any different from each other?" The man replied coldly, stating that Vlad's actions were bringing shame to House Vazid. He then warned the boy that the usual rules of the duel would not apply. He urged him to use every ounce of strength he possessed, for even then, defeat was inevitable. This day would be etched in history as the boy's moment to shine, and with that thought igniting his spirit, he charged forward. Pablo deflected the first attack, expertly sliding his blade and sending Vlad stumbling backward. For the first time in his life, Vlad was fighting for someone other than himself. He pressed forward, driven by an instinct, urging him to target the left side of Pablo's head, the very spot where the knight instinctively raised his shield in defense. Despite his skill, he was still a creature of habit. Soon the men standing behind Ender realized that this kid was no amateur. Vlad struck left and right with remarkable speed, yet Pablo remained composed. He could see the boy's natural talent. There was a fierce fire burning within him. It was evident that he was a wolf hungry for combat. Pablo couldn't help but admire that kind of enthusiasm. Vlad sensed something unusual just as Pablo landed a precise strike. Gazing at the boy, Pablo remarked on his talent, but cautioned that he was still too young and had a long journey ahead. In a desperate attempt to block the attack, Vlad raised his arm and sword, but it was not enough. He was sent crashing to the ground. Stepping forward for another blow, Pablo taunted, "Are you out of tricks, Vlad?" I expected our hero to dodge with flair, but instead, he was slammed to the ground, taking a brutal beating as he turned his face away from the blows. A voice echoed in his mind, urging him to stop absorbing these direct hits and to learn how to redirect the attacks instead. Another strike landed, and despite his best efforts to block, he was sent flying once more. He hit the back of his head hard and fell to his knees. Before he could gather himself, Pablo stood before him. "Impressive," he remarked, "but it's still too soon." Yet, he conceded that Vlad had proven himself worthy of the challenge. It was unfortunate that their first encounter had to unfold under such dire circumstances. They could have spoken at another time, but for now, this was the end. Vlad caught only a glimpse of the incoming attack, yet in a swift motion, he redirected it. Zaire was on the verge of halting the duel. The room fell silent, everyone stunned by the sudden turn of events. Pablo quickly recognized that he had just fallen for a counter strikingly similar to Zayar's. The crowd in the hall buzzed with confusion, struggling to comprehend how a mere squire had managed to block an attack from him. Ender shouted in disbelief, insisting it couldn't be possible, that it had to be a coincidence. Yet, as one glanced at Vlad, it was clear he was barely able to grip his sword. Despite this, Pablo was the only one convinced it wasn't mere luck. Both he and Vlad were grappling with the reality of what had just transpired. Vlad called out to him, his voice laced with curiosity. Why? He asked the knight, seeking answers that only their kind could provide. Pablo felt a flicker of confusion. Was the boy delirious? Vlad's eyes were half closed, and Pablo couldn't shake the feeling that he was lost in a dream, reliving a distant memory. The story unfolds around a boy who felt utterly worthless, yet yearned for a chance to shine in the world. He craved mastery and sought opportunities, desperate to discover his true worth and reach a place of beauty. It was then that Vlad revealed his own desire to embark on that journey as well. In that moment, Ender's talent began to blossom in a way the world had never witnessed before. Their swords clashed once more, and Ender struggled to comprehend the unfolding events. Vlad's hand was turning a deep shade of red. Meanwhile, Sire muttered to himself, surprised. He had taught the boy the technique, but he never anticipated he would wield it so effectively. As he watched Vlad fight, Pablo recalled that he had only ever taught him the basics. So how was the boy already performing like this? While Pablo noticed that Vlad's attacks had lost some of their sharpness, each strike now radiated an unyielding will of steel. To his surprise, this was beginning to feel enjoyable. He found himself wanting to understand what drove the boy's determination. Then, Pablo caught sight of Vlad's sword beginning to tremble. He recognized it instantly. Resonance. The boy was on the brink of awakening his aura. If that were true, Pablo had a knightly duty to uphold. He struck again, testing Vlad's ability to block the blow. He wanted to see the talent that was just beginning to emerge. Once again, Vlad found himself on the defensive as the audience murmured, struggling to comprehend the unfolding events. His blade began to glow, enveloped in a faint blue aura. The knights present recognized the significance of this transformation. It was a sign of power, and he swiftly strapped it onto his arm, readying himself for what was to come. He struck his sword against the ground and declared, I, Pablo Darnstein, acknowledge this boy is worthy. Then he commanded, say your name. Vlad hesitated for a moment before speaking, sharing the story of a boy born in the slums. He had wandered through those dark alleys, spending his entire life in search of a glimmer of hope. In that moment, Vlad had truly proven his worth. He gazed at the city's glow, and his eyes shimmered with newfound power. As his aura awakened, he declared, I am Vlad of Shora. The brilliance radiating from him was so intense that it blinded everyone in the room, compelling them to shield their eyes. Seizing the moment, Pablo activated his own aura, challenging Vlad to come at him with everything he had. He had earned his recognition. Surrounded by a shimmering aura, Vlad leaped toward him, but moments later, he found himself on the ground. Pablo smiled and remarked that he had fought valiantly. Our boy drifted into a peaceful sleep, but it was short-lived. Ender spoke up, announcing that Vlad had used his aura during the duel, a clear violation of the rules. As a result, he was disqualified. Pablo couldn't help but think how pathetic Ender was, unable to recognize the significance of the moment unfolding before him. Just then, Joseph and Zaire approached Pablo, expressing their gratitude for fulfilling his duty as a knight. Pablo humbly replied that he was merely doing his job, and that it had been an honor for him as well. Turning to the priest, Joseph then asked, was that truly aura we just witnessed? Shaking slightly, the priest confirmed the truth of Joseph's words. Joseph then pointed out the gravity of their situation. They faced a dilemma, breaking the sacred rules of the duel while also violating the Master Swordsman's code. The priest was at a loss for words, but Joseph reminded him the Master Swordsman was merely a man who once walked this earth. He had clearly outlined the knight's code of honor and their responsibilities. If Pablo had interrupted the boy's awakening, he would have violated the duty of a knight. In this room, no one was truly qualified to judge whether that was right or wrong. Therefore, they needed to consult with the Vatican and the royal family first. The dispute could only be resolved once they received an official decision. The Master Swordsman once proclaimed that every individual in the world deserved the opportunity to awaken. This belief instilled in every knight the duty to assist when that moment came. Anyone who chose the path of knighthood swore to uphold this oath. It was the first rule of their code, a decree from King Prozan himself. Sometime later, beneath a clear blue sky, our protagonist awoke in bed, his body stiff and aching. He groaned, craving water, lamenting that everything hurt. Just then, someone handed him a drink, and he blinked to find Joseph standing right in front of him. Our boy quickly apologized for passing out, but Joseph waved it off, assuring him it was no trouble at all. With a hint of concern, he then asked Vlad if he was feeling any stronger. But Vlad declined. Joseph thanked him for the duel, admitting he never expected Vlad to endure for so long. Thanks to Vlad, the decision had been postponed. He went on to explain the sacred rules of the master swordsman, and Joseph recalled that the voice in his head had once mentioned that name. He added that if things went well, Vlad would eventually have to take that oath himself one day. Our young hero was already envisioning himself as a knight, gallantly riding a horse. Joseph found that a bit far-fetched. He urged Vlad to recover quickly, reminding him that they couldn't linger much longer. Vlad insisted they could leave immediately, but Joseph countered that it was still too soon. Yet he couldn't help but notice the potential that lay within Vlad. A potential that he also had to protect. Before departing from Darmar, an attendant spoke with Alicia, informing her that most of the visitors were leaving. She inquired if Ender had already left. The old man confirmed that he had. It seemed he wouldn't be returning until the church's verdict was announced. Frustration bubbled within her as she expressed her anger at how these people had attempted to steal everything, yet they still walked away unscathed. Duncan reassured her, saying their time would come. But for now, the pressing issue was how to manage the region of Durmar. She nodded in agreement and inquired about the lemon harvest. Unfortunately, the old man replied, it was not going well. She sensed the situation was deteriorating, so she inquired why they hadn't ventured into the barley region. The old man replied that any significant changes to the economic structure needed to be postponed for the time being. She understood that, regrettably, it was too risky given the current circumstances. It felt as though, after conquering one monumental challenge, another loomed ahead of her. She gazed out the window and asked Duncan, "Isn't a knight supposed to be skilled at riding a horse?" He replied, "Of course. A knight who can't ride properly doesn't deserve the title." She chuckled, adding, "It seems God really can't give everything to one person." As the old man turned to look outside, they both spotted Vlad struggling hilariously to stay on his horse. He fell, landing hard on his back, and got up looking like a complete mess. Zaire frowned, questioning why the expensive horse wasn't performing as expected. Embarrassed, our protagonist replied, "Maybe it just wasn't expensive enough." Before he could think twice, his trainer smacked him on the head, reminding him to choose his words more carefully. With a hint of determination, he swore there was a time when he had actually managed to ride a horse. After checking in with him, Zaire confirmed that Vlad had successfully ridden a horse before. That's when Zaire began to question his earlier assumption that Vlad simply needed more training. Perhaps horses were genuinely an issue for him. They always seemed to shy away, even when he was merely standing nearby. It was as if the animals were instinctively afraid of him. With that, Zaire declared the day over, announcing that there would be no training tomorrow. However, our protagonist was eager to know when he would finally learn to ride a horse. Zaire, with a hint of resignation, advised him to let that dream go for now. Vlad closed his eyes, muttering that everyone seemed to enjoy telling him to give up. Tired, the trainer sighed, acknowledging that, unfortunately, there was nothing they could do at the moment. Upon returning home, they would ponder the situation. But for now, another issue demanded their attention. His friend joked that it seemed the horses liked him even less with each passing day. Meanwhile, our protagonist couldn't help but wonder what he would do if even the expensive horses turned their backs on him. With a laugh, his friend suggested he try riding a cow. At least they wouldn't run away so easily. Vlad was far from amused. His friend suggested that, if that was the case, he might as well stick to riding in Joseph's carriage. Zaire would surely appreciate that. With a wave goodbye, his friend departed, leaving Vlad to ponder the voice that whispered to him. Perhaps his internal energy was simply too potent for the creatures around him. After all, animals were far more sensitive to such forces. Vlad inquired about what he should do next, and the voice advised him that he needed to learn how to control the energy within him. Once he mastered his aura, handling such issues would become significantly easier. However, Vlad groaned in frustration, admitting that even summoning a small amount of aura felt nearly impossible. The voice gently reminded him, echoing Zaire's words, that this journey would be long and would require considerable time and effort. He glanced to the side and mentioned that after the ceremony, they would be heading back. Perhaps they could stop by that place one last time. As he walked through the corridors, Joseph couldn't shake the feeling that he had technically failed his mission, yet he believed people would understand his perspective. That boy had been nothing short of a natural disaster. There was nothing he could do. Yet, it was astonishing how a mere squire had orchestrated all of this. Suddenly he halted, feeling a blade pressed against his neck. With a sigh, he remarked that this was a rather rude way to greet someone in the morning, and perhaps it wasn't entirely necessary. Zaire, however, had a different opinion. He believed it was absolutely necessary. Ju then remarked that it seemed Zaire had nothing better to do, considering he had been standing there waiting for him all this time. Zaire replied that he was there to settle some unfinished business. Ju acknowledged Zaire's anger, but regrettably, he had no choice in the matter. With a measured tone, Ju pulled back his blade and urged him to calm down a bit. As a knight, he understood the demands of his profession. Even if their master commanded them to bark, obedience was expected. They locked eyes, their auras clashing in a silent battle of wills. Ju smirked, declaring that this would serve as a sufficient warning. They might call themselves knights, but to him, they were merely mutts, biting only when ordered. With that, he turned to leave, remarking that it seemed Zaire had grown weary of barking at him. Just as he was about to walk away, Zaire landed a sharp blow to Ju's cheek. Staggering back, Ju collided with the wall, muttering that his master was tolerant and wouldn't mind if he settled things right here. It was clear he wanted no part in this fight. He asked Zaire if he was satisfied, but before he could catch his breath, Zaire growled that he was far from it and struck him again. Ju fell to his knees, coughing violently. Zaire looked down at him and said that, as a young knight, he should understand why this had to happen. Gasping for breath, Ju conceded that perhaps he deserved this fate. Yet Zaire insisted it still didn't come close to compensating for the humiliation the prince had endured. With a surge of determination, Ju pushed himself to his feet, declaring that he was certain they would cross paths again soon. The empire was beginning to crumble, and in such turbulent times, choosing the right allies was crucial. With that thought lingering, he turned to leave, waving goodbye and promising to see him later. As much as Zaire hated to admit it, he knew it was true. Difficult times lay ahead. Knights would soon become more essential than ever. In front of the tree, our young protagonist remarked that the serpent felt almost like a friend, suggesting they could have a conversation. The voice, however, confessed that it, too, was puzzled by the serpent's recognition. Vlad waved his hand dismissively, urging it to get on with the conversation. Before Alicia arrived, a glowing eye emerged, and suddenly, the serpent was right in Vlad's face. Startled, he jumped back and asked if the voice was certain this creature was friendly. The voice hesitated, replying that it hoped so. Then, the serpent began to circle around him. After a few loops, it halted in front of Vlad, flashing a toothy grin. A sense of happiness washed over him as the voice urged him to stop trying to comprehend the spirit. They existed in entirely different realms. Suddenly, the serpent tilted its head skyward, and the plants around it began to radiate a soft blue glow. The tree behind the serpent shimmered, and Vlad found himself enveloped in a warm, comforting energy. He had no idea what it was, but the voice revealed that it had forgotten the mysteries of this place. What he had just received was a spiritual blessing. Later, at the castle gates, Alicia apologized for the modest banquet. Joseph replied that he appreciated it nonetheless, recognizing that House Heinel was still recovering from the recent battles. She expressed her gratitude, and he bowed, indicating that it was time to leave. Just then, Duncan interjected, instructing them to summon Vlad Shora. Their fool stood frozen in place, prompting Joseph to urge him to step forward. Zaire was aware that a reward had been prepared for the boy. Meanwhile, Joseph noted that he had asked Alicia to keep the ceremony as simple as possible. Our protagonist knelt before Alicia, who expressed her heartfelt gratitude. "I wouldn't be standing here if it weren't for you, Vlad Shora," she said earnestly. "You defended my honor in that battle and outshone everyone in the duel, thwarting my uncle's plans." She paused, searching for words to convey her appreciation. "I have nothing that could truly represent my gratitude." With that, she handed him a delicate handkerchief, a simple yet meaningful token of her thanks. She remarked that while he might not yet be a knight, he had fought with more honor than anyone that day. Joseph sensed that she was scheming. He knew she was clever. By making this statement, she was cleverly linking herself to House Vezad, intertwining her success with Vlad's future triumphs. As he examined the handkerchief, Vlad mused, "This looks quite expensive." Was it truly acceptable for him to accept it? He recalled Zaire's words, warning him that refusing what nobility offered was a grave mistake, much like that day with Joseph. To sidestep any potential issues, he took the handkerchief and thanked Lady Alicia. But then, a wave of shock swept through the room. Joseph sighed, realizing he had overlooked teaching the boy about this particular custom. Vlad found the world of nobility utterly perplexing. Growing up in the slums, he had never encountered such customs. Sensing his confusion, Duncan stepped forward to clarify. He explained that a noblewoman had two ways to present a handkerchief. She could place it at the tip of a sword, a gesture that symbolized honor. Alternatively, she could hand it over directly, a sign of love. Our boy stood there, casually holding the handkerchief while Alicia blushed furiously. Unbeknownst to him, the atmosphere was charged with unspoken tension. Everyone else in the room was acutely aware of the implications. In the background, Joseph buried his face in his hand, struggling to comprehend why the boy had chosen this moment for such a gesture. Meanwhile, Vlad, blissfully oblivious, simply remarked, "Well, thanks for the handkerchief, I guess." As they made their way back, Joseph remarked that it had been ages since he had witnessed something so absurd, though he knew it was largely his own doing. His tale was bound to inspire the city's bards for years to come. Still reeling from the events, Vlad offered an apology, admitting he had been completely unaware of the situation. Zayar sighed and advised him that, moving forward, he should consult him before accepting or rejecting anything from the nobles. However, Joseph beamed with excitement, revealing that he had just received an honor from a lady of high nobility. In that moment, he was on the brink of becoming a knight. Vlad was left bewildered. What did this mean he was almost a knight? Joseph explained that wherever Alicia's name was honored, he would share in that honor as a true knight. Our boy was astonished. He had no idea there were such benefits. However, Joseph clarified that this privilege only applied within Durmar, as Alicia had only just assumed power. Now it made sense why he was on the verge of knighthood. He wasn't officially one yet. It wasn't going to be easy. Joseph warned him that even though he had accepted the handkerchief by accident, he must never lose it. It represented Alicia's honor. When Vlad asked what would happen if he did lose it, Joseph replied cryptically, "You'll have to figure that out yourself." From the look on Joseph's face, Vlad understood all too well. Not even Joseph could save him from the consequences of that mistake. Joseph pulled out a letter, revealing that, thanks to Vlad's actions, he hadn't needed to use it. It was a promissory note proving that Alicia had borrowed 10,000 gold from him. Curious, our hero asked why. Joseph explained that it had been a contingency plan in case they lost the duel. The debt would have provided him with a valid reason to take Alicia under his protection, ensuring she wouldn't fall into her uncle's grasp. It was clear that the money was counterfeit. She had never borrowed a single coin. Vlad couldn't fathom why he had gone to such lengths. However, Joseph explained that even without her title, she would still be a symbol of hope, and having her by their side would make it remarkably easy to ignite a rebellion against Durmar. As Vlad listened, he began to understand that the world of nobility was merely a game of justifications and facades. Suddenly, he glanced over his shoulder, sensing something ominous approaching from the eastern forest. In the distance, smoke billowed into the sky, and he could make out a large group of horses moving in disarray. A troop was heading straight for him. Vlad's heart raced as he pondered the possibility of a bandit horde on the move. Joseph drew his sword, commanding his opponent to stand still. This was the moment he had been plotting since the duel began. As the riders approached, they knelt before him. One of them spoke up, apologizing for the delay, but assuring Joseph that they could secure the compensation. Joseph acknowledged their effort, reminding them that it wasn't their original mission, but he appreciated their dedication nonetheless. He instructed the man to stand, glanced to the side, and posed the question, "Is that the boy who accepted Lady Alicia's handkerchief?" Joseph replied with a simple yes, and requested that the man look after the boy as well. However, Vlad sensed something unsettling. The man's gaze was anything but kind, and his aura felt distinctly different from that of the other knights. The air was thick with the same kind of danger Joseph had sensed from the bandits in Shkora presence that screamed to his instincts, warning him never to turn his back. He cautiously asked the man if he was heading back to Sturma, hoping they might travel together. But the man declined, stating he was in a hurry and needed to press on. With a nod, Joseph thanked him once more for his service, feeling the weight of the encounter linger in the air. The man responded that he had merely fulfilled his duty as one of Asid's secret knights, a title Vlad had never even heard of. Curiosity gnawed at him. He had no idea what lay within that mysterious sack. Sensing his intrigue, Joseph leaned in and asked, "Are you sure you want to know what's inside?" Inside that sack lay undeniable proof of the nobility's heartlessness, cruelty, and mercilessness. Poor Endra had already departed this world. Meanwhile, in Sturma, the Count sat listening to a report from an elderly aide. The man informed him that a group was approaching. They showed no signs of stopping, moving steadily toward the dragon's path. The Count, observing them closely, assumed they were genuine pilgrims, a sight he hadn't encountered in ages. He felt a stirring sense of duty, believing it wouldn't hurt to lend a hand to these travelers, even if they remained unaware of his assistance. After all, they were people deserving of respect. The old man nodded in agreement, promising to make the necessary arrangements. The Count remarked that he had heard Vlad delivered a splendid performance. The old man added that it had touched the hearts of many. This made the Count ponder deeply. It had been ages since he had encountered someone who truly embodied the swordsman's code. Typically, knights hailed from noble lineages, their talents honed from birth. In an era where a knight's skill was valued above all else, it must have been an extraordinary battle indeed. It brought back memories of the golden age of Houseleist, a time defined by its remarkable generation. He turned to the old man and instructed him to prepare something special for the boy. The Count had expected Joseph to abandon the competition, given his struggles, but it appeared luck was on his side with the discovery of Vlad. However, this twist only complicated the decision of choosing an heir even further. At the squire's table, the conversation buzzed with excitement over Vlad's return from his mission. Everyone was aware that he had faced a true knight and awakened his aura. Yet some skeptics still found it hard to believe. Just a few months prior, he had been surviving in the sewers of the slums. Suddenly, the door swung open, and a figure stepped in, declaring their hunger. Vlad strode in confidently, announcing that it had been a month since his last visit. However, as he surveyed the room, he noticed an unsettling silence. The nobles who once regarded him with disdain now averted their gazes, fear etched on their faces. Their previous criticisms felt hollow, rendered meaningless in the wake of his presence. The simple world they had clung to had been irrevocably shattered by the arrival of one man. As Vlad stuffed himself with sausages, he glanced up and asked, "Do we really have to keep staring? All we want is to eat in peace." Portly shrugged, saying it was only natural given everything that had happened. Vlad chuckled, noting how quickly news seemed to spread. Curiosity piqued. Portly then inquired, "So, what are you planning for the holidays?" Vlad was completely unaware that a holiday was upon him. Portly explained that all the squires would have the week off, but Vlad was at a loss for how to spend it. Coming from a humble background, he had no noble home to return to. Sensing his friend's uncertainty, Portly suggested, "Why not come to my place? I can have my father send you an official invitation." Vlad paused, contemplating the idea. He had never truly had a friend before. His companion continued to list enticing reasons. There would be sausages and all sorts of meats that Vlad craved. To top it off, he mentioned that he had heard Vlad was in search of a horse and his family's business was deeply involved with them. When Vlad heard that they had better horses than Zayar's, his interest was instantly piqued. If that was true, he had to pay his friend a visit. Later, during their training session, Vlad's mind wandered, and Zayar quickly picked up on his distraction. Without hesitation, Zayar launched another attack, urging Vlad to focus. They exchanged blows, with Vlad skillfully blocking each strike, but Zayar's frustration was mounting. Finally, he readied a powerful attack and struck Vlad squarely in the back. In that instant, Vlad felt his stomach churn. Zayar glared at him, demanding he stop pretending. It was time for Vlad to realize he wasn't anything special just because he had fought a knight from Durmar. It seemed all of Zayar's advice was falling on deaf ears. Vlad opened his mouth to respond, but the look on Zayar's face silenced him. Instead, he offered a quiet apology. Zayar, clearly frustrated, told him that if he was going to keep dragging himself to training without any commitment, he might as well not come at all. With that, he turned on his heel and walked away, declaring that their session was over for the day. Feeling dejected, Zayar walked away, his mind swirling with frustration. He recognized that Vlad's accomplishments were impressive, yet they felt like a fragile sandcastle vulnerable to being swept away by a single wave. In this moment, Zayar understood he needed a stronger foundation. As he wandered through the hallways, the voice echoed in his mind, reminding him to focus on the basics. Anger bubbled within him. He was determined to prove that he could build something far more enduring. Vlad insisted he was merely attempting to activate his aura once more. His companion gently reminded him that not every knight was suited for harnessing aura, and a knight without it didn't equate to weakness. Aura was merely a manifestation of potential, a tool to push one's limits further. However, Vlad needed to keep in mind that he was still a novice in swordsmanship, with much yet to learn. If that were the case, Zayar wouldn't even bother lecturing him. As usual, Vlad found himself on the receiving end of a beating during training, followed by a scolding from the voice. He had grown accustomed to being underestimated and humiliated, yet what he saw in Zayar's face was not disdain, it was disappointment. That stung far more than any sword strike. The voice remarked that Vlad hadn't even had a chance to discuss his holiday plans. However, Vlad dismissed it, insisting it didn't matter. He felt he didn't deserve a break. Determined, he continued his training under the moonlight. He raised his sword, swung it once more, and a faint trail of energy shimmered in his wake. He felt exhaustion creeping in, and the voice in his head insisted that it was time to stop for the day. Though he longed to push on, his companion reminded him that he was merely wearing himself out, without making any real progress. With a resigned stretch of his back, he agreed. As he glanced up at the moon, a realization washed over him. They were both right. He was still at the very beginning of his journey. From atop the wall, Zayar observed intently. The boy's gaze, as always, was fixed on the moon, embodying the spirit of a wolf in relentless pursuit. Meanwhile, in Count Ravenum's territory within the city of Trinova, chaos reigned. Flames engulfed the streets, and the air was filled with piercing screams. Inside the throne hall, blood and bodies lay strewn across the floor, painting a grim picture of the devastation. A man lay on the ground, a voice cutting through the silence asking why he hadn't moved. A figure approached, sword in hand, demanding to know if the final mission had been completed. As the figure drew closer, the fallen man replied that this was apparently how it was all going to end. Before him stood his target, Godin. The fallen man acknowledged that a knight must prioritize his master's orders over his own honor, but that didn't mean he would follow every command without question. The former knights of Count Gathar would never have stooped to such depths. Godin retorted that this was precisely why they were all dead. The knight then ominously warned him that one day, his own light would dim as well. He instructed Godin to deliver a message to Count Gathar. He had been waiting for him in hell. Godin simply replied that the message would be delivered, and with that, red splattered through the air. Meanwhile, Lad stood there, looking bewildered. "Am I really getting a holiday?" he asked. Joseph nodded, adding that he had even heard Lad received an invitation from a Connor family. Lad's shock was palpable, and Joseph couldn't help but laugh. "News travels fast," he said, a grin spreading across his face. Besides, his friend was the squire of Gregory, who undoubtedly spread the word to everyone. Our protagonist could already picture how that message reached Joseph. Joseph assured him that, regardless of the circumstances, he was getting a break, and now that he actually had a destination, it felt even better. Vlad simply thanked him, all the while noticing that Zaire had his eyes closed. Joseph felt the tension in the air. Something had clearly transpired between them. He could have broken the awkward silence with a few words, but instead, he chose to let them squirm. Vlad stood there, acutely aware that the silence was painful, unsure of how to exit the room gracefully. Finally, Zaire broke the stillness, declaring that no matter the occasion, a knight never ceased his sword practice. Vlad nodded in understanding, and Zaire continued, "If you skip training for just one day, you'll feel it. If you skip a week, your enemies will definitely notice." Zaire recognized that Vlad wasn't one to shy away from training, but in moments like this, consistency was crucial. With a determined smile, he added, "I can't wait to see how much you progressed when you return." Upon hearing that, our boy's face brightened, and he eagerly replied that he understood. Joseph then casually cautioned him not to get his hopes up about the horses at his friend's estate, expressing his doubts that he would find one that suited him. After all, the issue wasn't with the horses, it was Vlad. With a wave, he dismissed him, adding, "See you in a week, but don't bring back any gifts." Vlad couldn't shake the thought that Joseph might actually be expecting a gift, leaving him puzzled about what these guys were thinking. Once they were alone, Joseph mentioned House Connor. Zaire chimed in, noting that their visit would certainly attract attention, and perhaps that person would take an interest in Vlad. Joseph was all too aware that this individual would undoubtedly try to steal Vlad away. Naturally, he wasn't about to let anyone take his boy away. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to our young hero, looking utterly bewildered as they dressed him in new clothes. Oksana stood before him, a smile on her face. "That color looks splendid on you," she remarked, noting how it complemented his leather armor beautifully. With his well-built physique, it seemed anything would look good on him. He felt a slight blush creep across his cheeks as he thanked Lady Oksana. With a knowing smile, she reminded him of his upcoming visit to House Connor, emphasizing that he carried the honor of their house with him. "You must at least uphold basic etiquette," she cautioned, "or you risk bringing shame upon us." Stepping closer, she placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder and added, "Please, don't embarrass yourself." Our boy, utterly starstruck, gazed at her as she sparkled like an angel. Blushing all the way to his ears, he simply nodded and murmured that he understood. She then informed him that after the holiday she would assign him an instructor to ensure he grasped the lesson. From that moment on, he vowed never to accept a lady's kindness with his bare hands again. Realizing the weight of her words, he quickly apologized, fully aware of what she meant. She then reminded him that accepting a handkerchief came with expectations. He needed to start acting like someone who understood its significance. Picking up a basket of oranges, she instructed him to bring them as a gift, noting that it was considered rude to arrive empty-handed. Vlad expressed his gratitude once more, and with a playful wave, she urged him to enjoy his holiday. He stepped out of the room and caught a glimpse of his reflection. The person staring back at him was almost unrecognizable. Beside him in the glass, he saw Gemma, a memory from a distant past. The news he had heard recently indicated she was in a convent surrounded by nuns. All he could do was hope she was finding peace and happiness there. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever clothes she was wearing now must feel strange against her skin. The scene shifted to a convent, where the kitchen buzzed with chatter. Someone mentioned a squire from House Vezid who was stirring up quite a commotion. As the nuns gathered, gossiping about the boy's striking good looks, one of them, a red-haired girl, was on her hands and knees, scrubbing the floor. Her hands were battered and bruised as the women continued to gossip. They spoke of a boy with blonde hair and blue eyes, clearly of noble descent. To add to his impressive lineage, he had awakened his aura at a remarkably young age. But when Gemma heard the mention of nobility, a sinking feeling settled in her stomach. It couldn't be him. There was no way her friend had already accomplished so much. All she wanted was the reassurance that, at the very least, he was still alive. The other nuns glanced over, questioning why they couldn't hear the sound of scrubbing. They reminded her that, as someone who hadn't made a donation to join, she should understand her place. She ought to be working harder than everyone else, grateful for the blessing of being allowed to stay there. They walked away, laughter trailing behind them, taunting her with the notion that she had nowhere to go if she left this place. Gemma remained on the ground, a mix of emotion swirling within her. At least she had learned the harsh realities of this world long before leaving the Smiling Rose. The memory of her arrival flooded back, how a woman had warned them that not just anyone was welcomed here, for this was sacred ground. She was acutely aware of what those girls had been through, and she knew they couldn't be here. Yet, Marcella stood firm, declaring that all of them were virgins, having been cared for by the bishop himself. The nun acknowledged her words, but insisted that there simply wasn't enough room to accommodate everyone. Undeterred, Marcella pressed on, reminding her that she had already donated a fortune to this place, more than enough to sustain these girls for a decade. The woman hesitated, but Gemma broke the silence. What about Marcella? Marcella turned to the girl, urging her to focus on her own safety and simply go inside. However, the nuns stood firm, blocking Marcella's path at the entrance. With a resigned sigh, Marcella admitted she had anticipated this rejection. Still, she insisted, at the very least, you should take care of the girls. Suddenly, a group of men emerged from the forest, their intentions clear. The nun hurried to shut the door, ushering the girls inside, but it was too late. For Marcella, she had been caught. One of the men sneered, declaring that at last, this honest worker would pay for her deeds. In a panic, she screamed, her voice filled with desperation as she cried out for Marcella, who was being dragged away by her hair. The door slammed shut in Gemma's face, leaving her alone to cry as she scrubbed the floor. Life had taken a serious turn for her. Meanwhile, Vlad stood in awe. He knew his friend's family was influential, but the sheer size of the castle and its imposing gates far exceeded anything he had ever imagined. Suddenly, an old man appeared, warmly welcoming young Master Portley. Portley's face brightened with joy as he rushed over to embrace him, exclaiming how much he had missed him. The old man explained that Portley's father was currently occupied with some unexpected visitors. With a twinkle in his eye, he urged Vlad to take a look at the ranch, the pride of their household. Vlad expressed his gratitude, intrigued by the idea. He was eager to see the horses. The old man assured him that the head of the house would later present the finest specimens, but for now, Vlad was welcome to explore the others. As they crossed the bridge, the scene shifted to pure chaos. The horses were in a frenzy, their panic palpable in the air. The moment they spotted Vlad, panic erupted, and they all fled. Cows, sheep, and every creature in sight vanished in an instant. Our boy quickly understood that even the livestock were not an option for him. The old man, sensing the gravity of the situation, advised Vlad to seek refuge at the church. Vlad firmly believed there was no curse, especially since Father Andrew had cared for him. As he watched the horses from afar, despair washed over him. What was the use of wielding aura if he could never become a knight? Feeling utterly defeated, he muttered to himself that while everyone else rode, he would simply run alongside them. But his friends, sensing his hopelessness, urged him not to give up. They had an impressive array of horses, each with unique breeds and purposes, so surely one of them would suit Vlad's needs. Though he expressed hope, doubt lingered in his eyes. Portley then spoke of a horse unlike any other, boasting an unparalleled pedigree. With a few encouraging pats on Vlad's back, he assured him that tomorrow his father would reveal this extraordinary horse to him. Inside the house, the afternoon sun bathed the scene as they enjoyed a barbecue. Though the story was set in medieval times, the sight of multiple ovens sizzling with food was nothing short of incredible. Vlad couldn't help but feel his stomach rumble in response. He remarked that his friend's family truly took hospitality to heart. Just then, a voice called out nearby, "You're finally here." A man introduced himself as Olsen Connor, clearly the lord of this realm. Just as our protagonist was about to share his name, Olsen swiftly interrupted. "Everyone already knows who you are. You've been the talk of Sturma," he said, giving Vlad a friendly pat on the shoulder. "It's great to have you here." Olsen recognized the highly talented young man before him, one destined to bring honor and pride to Sturma. His son had certainly made a wonderful friend. He invited them to join him for a conversation while dinner was being prepared. It was remarkable so many unique guests had gathered in his home today. Suddenly, Vlad recalled that Olsen had mentioned unexpected visitors earlier, though he had no idea who they might be. Just then, Olsen said something peculiar. The strange part was that both of them hailed from House Vayazik. Instantly, Vlad realized there was only one member of the Vayazik family who was absent. When the door swung open, he froze. Seated calmly in a chair was a man. As soon as their eyes met, the man greeted Vlad with an air of casual familiarity. "Haven't seen you in a while. How have you been?" Vlad hesitated for a moment, then returned the greeting with a formal nod to Lord Rugger. Rugger chuckled and said, "This time, you don't have a choice. You're eating with us because the food here is amazing." In that moment, Vlad realized the jab was aimed at him for refusing the peanuts that one time. As he glanced around, he noticed everyone from House Rugger glaring at him with barely concealed disdain. This had nothing to do with the fact that he had just beaten the hell out of their squire's scooter. Yet Vlad smiled and thanked them, expressing his eagerness for dinner. Rugger appeared taken aback by his enthusiasm, then offered a sly smirk. He casually mentioned that he had heard Vlad was on holiday and suggested they meet tomorrow. Vlad inquired about Rugger's intentions, to which Rugger replied that he wanted to take him somewhere special. The following day, they found themselves outside, surrounded by a group of riders. Everyone was mounted on horseback, everyone except Vlad. Just ahead, a girl with long ears turned to him, curious. "Why are you staring?" she asked, a hint of mischief in her voice. "Is this your first time seeing someone from the beast race?" Her name was Dorothea, and she was a feline. Vlad, feeling a bit bored, simply remarked that there's a first time for everything. Then, he overheard someone mention that he was from the slums of Shora, and they were curious about how he became a squire for the Vazid. Vlad replied, "It's much stranger for Rugger to have a half-animal as a mage." Frustration was beginning to bubble up inside her as she faced the boy, who never seemed to answer her questions. "Is it true you can summon aura but can't ride a horse?" she asked, her eyes darting to the chubby guy beside him. "Even your big buddy can manage that." With a shrug, the boy replied, "Life has mysteries that can't be explained." She pressed on, "That's just strange." Meanwhile, Vlad couldn't help but wonder when this girl would finally stop talking. He couldn't quite grasp the purpose of this trip, or if it was truly worth stepping away from his usual routine. Dorothea, however, was relentless, demanding to know if he was even paying attention. In a moment of frustration, he quipped, if her race was known for talking so much. She shot back, questioning whether he was discriminating against her heritage. He then wondered if this was a mage issue, to which she retorted that now he was discriminating against her profession. At that moment, Rugger intervened, telling her to stop bothering the boy as he was a special guest. She shot back, claiming the boy made a face as if he had just tasted sour milk every time he glanced her way. Rugger insisted she stop annoying him and her spirits visibly sank. Later, at the top of the hill, a guy asked Vlad what he thought of their position. Vlad simply replied that it was fine. Portly informed the boys that Rudder was planning to go hunting. They glanced around, but it seemed the people nearby were less than enthusiastic about it. Even the falcon, which could have been used for the hunt, remained caged and untouched. Then, Portly gestured toward the horizon, claiming something was approaching. Rugger remarked that it was a promising sign. He hadn't anticipated a group of pilgrims passing through that area. He hadn't commanded them to raise the banners to avoid frightening the travelers. With the Vazed symbol now displayed, he declared it was time to begin the hunt. Nearby, a majestic black horse stood among several smaller steeds, perched atop the hill while the others enjoyed their meal. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble violently. The horse, sensing something lurking beneath the earth, became alert. Meanwhile, the group of pilgrims moved steadily along their path. Rugger's team observed from a nearby hill, and Vlad, feeling restless, remarked that this was clearly just an escort mission. He was on the verge of voicing his frustrations, but held back until the cart jolted violently over a rock, causing everything to shake. Without a second thought, he leaped out of the cart, exclaiming that, at this rate, he'd prefer to walk. His friend asked if he was all right. He replied that he was, though it felt strange that his heart wouldn't stop racing. Portly suggested it was likely due to the cart bouncing too much, but our protagonist believed it was his own fault. So, he decided to take a walk to calm himself down. Still, he couldn't deny that the view in this place was absolutely breathtaking. Gazing at the expansive horizon, Portly remarked that everything stretched out to the plains of Varna. The landscape was remarkably clean, a testament to the expedition he had undertaken with Joseph during the winter. The boy smiled, feeling a sense of ownership in the pristine view. Just then, Vlad turned his gaze to the left and noticed a cloud of dust rising in the distance, signaling something as someone approaching. A herd of horses approached, startling Vlad. At the forefront was a striking black stallion, and as he watched, an inexplicable sensation washed over him. He placed a hand on his chest, bewildered by the emotions stirring within him. As the creatures continued their relentless advance from the mountaintop, Rugger remarked that they appeared quite promising. However, a strange thought crossed his mind. Why were they heading south? The other riders shared his concerns, noting the oddity of their direction. They should be moving north, where fresh grass awaited them. Clearly, these creatures were desperate, and there had to be a reason for their unusual path. It felt as though something was pursuing them. Vlad, hand pressed against his chest, watched the horses surge forward, already sensing the unease in the air. The creatures were gripped by terror, but he couldn't fathom the reason. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble, reminiscent of an earthquake. Yet Vlad recognized those vibrations. He knew all too well what they signified. From behind the horse, a mound of earth began to rise. Suddenly, the massive form of a dragon emerged, its menacing silhouette dominating the chaos. All the riders, Rugger, the pilgrims, and our young hero were gripped by terror. As the death worm continued its relentless advance, it weaved through the panicked horses, sending everyone into a frenzy. That beast showed no mercy, sinking its teeth into an unfortunate little horse. A wave of unease washed over Dorothy. She sensed that something was amiss. This creature was not meant to be carnivorous. Her gaze fell upon a peculiar red crystal embedded in its forehead, a sight that sent a chill down her spine. Just then, the black horse veered off course, prompting one of the men to alert Rugger that they were now heading straight for the pilgrims. Meanwhile, the crystal pulsed ominously, radiating a dark aura. The shadow worm shifted, and in the distance, the pilgrims scrambled to escape. Rugger turned to Dorothy, seeking information about the creature. She explained that these beasts were blind and deaf, relying solely on the vibrations in the ground to navigate. Determined, Rugger instructed her to devise a plan to divert the creatures away from the fleeing pilgrims. The man called out to Vlad, urging him to accompany Dorothy and signal as soon as he found a way to distract the beasts. Vlad nodded in agreement. With a determined grip on his sword, the man commanded everyone's attention. The circumstances were unusual, but that was irrelevant. They were in a prime position to assist those in need. After all, the Count had emphasized the importance of properly receiving the pilgrims. He charged forward, urging everyone to protect the others. Yet, deep down, he sensed something was amiss. Someone was orchestrating this chaos. As he pondered the audacity of those who dared to strike invasive territory, he activated the aura of his sword. On the ground stood Dorothea, searching for a magic seal that would create vibrations. Vlad was puzzled. He had no idea what that meant. The voice explained that it was a type of mystery, akin to sacred power and auras. Together, these magic seals form the trinity of mysteries. Suddenly, it clicked for Vlad. No wonder Rudder kept someone like her close. Meanwhile, in the distance, a sudden burst of flames erupted. They turned to see the source, and at the center of it all was the death worm engulfed in fire. As Rudder charged forward, his aura blazing, our protagonist was taken aback, his shock evident at the sight before him. The disparity in power was overwhelming, but a voice echoed in Rudder's mind, warning him that his attack had lacked the necessary depth. He simply hadn't had time to prepare. Realizing the grim truth, Rudder understood that he was unlikely to emerge victorious. The creature's skin was far tougher than he had anticipated. Suddenly, the monster lunged, aiming to sink its teeth into him. He urged his horse to the side, narrowly avoiding the creature's attack as it burrowed back into the ground. His companions quickly asked if he was all right, but he cautioned them not to let their guard down. The danger was far from over. The voice chimed in, noting that this development had just complicated matters significantly. Rudder was an exceptional knight, yet he found himself ill-equipped to confront the creature lurking underground. In response, the prince commanded everyone to search for the beast. It had to be close. As Rudder scanned the area, trying to discern the creature's path, one of his companions suddenly pointed and exclaimed that it was heading toward the pilgrims. Without hesitation, Rudder altered his course as our protagonist called out to Dorothea, urging her to hurry. Glancing to the side, he noticed her meticulously painting something with ink on her tail. Confused, he admonished her, insisting this wasn't the time for such distractions. However, she calmly replied that it wasn't mere play. This was how mages of her race created scrolls. On the ground, the paper shimmered with a soft glow as she urged him to stop rushing her. "I'm almost finished," she reassured him, turning to the chubby guy. She instructed him to take his scroll to Rugger, who would know how to use it properly. However, the poor guy hesitated, clearly reluctant to make the delivery. She sighed, explaining, "I'm completely drained after using all my magic to create this." Moreover, the boy beside Eric had no experience riding a horse. The voice whispered to Vlad that even mounted, the lad wouldn't reach his destination in time. In that instant, Vlad realized he had only one option. He seized the scroll from the boy's grasp, understanding that the only way to resolve this was to take a leap of faith. Dorothea asked what he was thinking and urged him not to jump, but it was already too late. As he raced down the hill, Vlad reflected on Rugger's strength. He was no weak man. The soldiers around him were undoubtedly the strongest, leaving no reason for a mere squire like Vlad to intervene. Yet he couldn't stand by and let a beast like that ravage their land. He knew all too well the devastation of a stronger enemy laying waste to his home. A voice urged him to focus, warning that he might trip and, of course, that's exactly what happened. Feeling like a fool, he hit his arm, slammed into his ribs, and tumbled down the mountain. At least he landed on his stomach instead of his head. From above, the two of them cheered, relieved that he was still moving. Vlad found it odd that he felt strangely fine. He was certain he had broken something. Suddenly, a blue glow began to emanate from him. A little black horse nearby turned to look at him, its eyes reflecting the radiant aura he was giving off. The voice explained that the snake's blessing had activated, saving him from certain death. Vlad was genuinely impressed. He had no idea such power existed. Without hesitation, he took off running, planning to return later to express his gratitude. As he sprinted, he glanced around, wondering where the pilgrims had gone. Up ahead, he spotted a figure and skidded to a halt. It wasn't just any pilgrim. It was Father Andrea himself. The sight sent a wave of anxiety through Vlad as he turned, desperately searching for Rudger. The troops were still too far away, and the worm was closing in fast. He knew Andrea was in grave danger, and the scroll still clutched tightly in his hand weighed heavily on his mind. The voice echoed in his mind, reminding him that fate often unfolded in unexpected ways, and now he had to make a choice. The worm continued its relentless advance, pushing him to act. In a decisive moment, he hurled the scroll into the air and drew his sword, fully aware that hesitation was no longer an option. If he was the only hope, he had to fight. With a swift slash, the magic circle began to take shape. Several runes etched themselves onto his sword, causing it to vibrate with a low hum. He called out to the cursed beast and struck the ground with his blade. In that moment, energy surged outward, but a voice cautioned him it wasn't powerful enough. He needed to channel his own energy to amplify the vibrations. Vlad concentrated, catching a glimpse of his reflection in the water. With a determined gaze, he summoned the cursed snake. The aura around him intensified, and at last, the beast erupted from the ground. Taunting the creature, Vlad declared that he was right there, daring it to strike. The monster, compelled by his challenge, lunged at him, but with remarkable agility, Vlad dodged the first attack, ready for what came next. The voice cautioned him sharply, warning him not to entertain any thoughts of victory in this fight. His sole objective was to buy time. He lacked the strength to inflict any real damage, so his only task was to keep the beast occupied. Vlad cast a glance over his shoulder, anxious to see if the others would arrive soon. Just then, the monster lunged forward to attack once more. He braced himself and rolled to the side once more. But, just like before, the creature burrowed underground and vanished from sight. Vlad scanned his surroundings, glancing left and right, wondering if it had gone after the pilgrims. Suddenly, he felt a tremor beneath him. The ground began to crack, and a voice warned him to be careful. But it was too late. He was on the verge of being devoured. From a distance, Rector witnessed the chaos and shouted a warning. As the monster emerged from the dust, something unexpected caught his eye. A small black horse appeared, leaving him utterly astonished. Finally, Vlad had managed to acquire a horse. He was overjoyed, but a voice urged him to pay attention. An aura radiated from the horse's forehead. It may have appeared to be an ordinary horse, but within it resided the spirit of a unicorn. As the creature's magic began to flow, our boy couldn't help but smile. For someone who had come so close to death, he was certainly reveling in the moment. For the first time, he experienced the world from the back of a horse. As the thrill of battle surged through him, Rector called out, checking if he was all right. Vlad assured him he was fine. Meanwhile, Rugger watched closely, noting that Vlad had employed a special technique with his sword, drawing the monster's attention without hesitation. This not only showcased his remarkable talent, but also revealed his willingness to put himself in harm's way for the sake of others. In that moment, it was clear. He was a young squire who truly embodied the principles of a master swordsman. Rugger commended him, declaring it a courageous decision that truly honored the knights. Vlad felt a twinge of awkwardness but managed to express his gratitude. Rugger then emphasized that they needed to slay the beast. It was the only way to ensure the pilgrim's safety. Yet, our young hero hesitated, voicing his concern that the creature was a remnant of a fallen dragon. Rugger confidently declared that he could handle it, simply by looking into the horse's eyes. Vlad sensed the truth in his words. Rugger then revealed that he possessed Dorothea's seal and an exceptional horse, making him the only one capable of stalling the beast. Meanwhile, Vlad doubted his ability to control this magnificent creature. Yet, as he gazed deeply into the horse's eyes, a realization began to dawn on him. The creature was fiercely protective of its herd. If that was the case, they would have to work together to ensure their safety. Rugger instructed Vlad to circle around the hill ahead, promising to wait for him on the other side. Without hesitation, Vlad acknowledged the plan and pulled away from the army, the beast hot on his heels. A quick glance back revealed the true terror of the monster pursuing him. His horse galloped with astonishing speed, leaving the soldiers bewildered by the sudden acceleration. Rugger smiled and suggested that perhaps it was simply because they were both extraordinary. Meanwhile, Vlad pressed on, until a voice instructed him to place his sword against the ground to create more vibrations. He complied, driving his sword into the earth and unleashing a series of powerful impacts. The dragon was hot on his heels, closing in fast. Meanwhile, on the other side of the mountain, Rugger commanded his soldiers to evacuate all the pilgrims. Just then, he spotted their boy racing toward them from the horizon. The dragon unleashed its fury, obliterating the mountain as it pursued him relentlessly. Rugger took a deep breath, steadied himself, and closed his eyes, feeling his aura begin to expand around him. With a mere touch to his sword, lava began to erupt from the ground. Vlad, who had been dragging his weapon along the earth, stared in disbelief at the chaos unfolding before him. Meanwhile, Rugger stood confidently in the open, his aura expanding around him. A voice echoed explaining that this kind of expansion, reminiscent of Jujutsu Kaisen, was a privilege reserved for the exceptionally powerful. Knight Rugger Visor was even more formidable than Vlad had ever imagined. He was starting to understand the vast chasm of strength that separated them. If he ever had to face this warrior in battle, he would be reduced to ashes in an instant. Just when he thought he might catch a break, the dragon lunged forward, ready to bite once more. But then, as if sensing something, the beast suddenly hesitated. Vlad observed the scene, his gaze fixed on Rugger just ahead. A voice echoed in his mind, revealing that the beast was sensing an imminent threat. He knew he had to act, but his energy was too depleted to capture the monster's attention. Suddenly, without warning, the horse pivoted and charged forward. Vlad was reluctant to take action, but the little horse dashed in front of the beast, galloping in frantic circles. Panic surged through him as he shouted for the horse to stop. Then, in a surprising twist, the horse leaped, and Vlad felt his aura expand. The unicorn's horn glowed to life, intertwining Vlad's aura with that of the snake in the horse, creating a powerful fusion. The boy was transforming into a beast himself, radiating an aura powerful enough to capture the creature's attention. The horse stood poised, anticipating the monster's strike, and just at the perfect moment, it dodged with astonishing speed. This horse was truly remarkable. Legends say that on that horizon, the two became one. Lohengrin continued to gallop, desperately trying to reach Rugger, who stood resolutely with his sword in hand. A voice echoed in his mind, revealing that Rugger's power was steadily growing, suggesting that soon the monster would be too frightened to make a move. However, Vlad was at his breaking point. He could no longer harness his aura. Just then, the other knights appeared at his side, ready to face the impending threat. They urged the young boy not to give up, activating their own auras in solidarity. With so many drawing the monster's attention, it was finally enough. The guides instructed him to keep moving until they had passed Rugger. Honestly, it seemed like Rugger was just trying to buy them about 10 minutes. There he stood, tall and resolute, his sword glowing with an expanding aura. Vlad called out to him, and as Rugger opened his eyes, a rush of figures surged past him. Steeling himself against the beast, Rugger declared that it was now his turn to act. With unwavering resolve, he proclaimed that this land belonged to House Vazid, and he would not permit any monster to defile it. A whirlwind of flames erupted around him as he launched his attack, sending the creature sprawling. With a vertical slash, he unleashed a wave of fire that left the pilgrims and everyone present in stunned silence. For the first time, Vlad witnessed the true power of a knight. Just a short while ago, he could never have imagined such a display of strength was even possible. The world of knights he was now exploring felt like an endless mountain. He never imagined that someone like Gordon Zaire or Pablo could achieve such feats, and he questioned whether he would ever be able to do the same. For the first time, a humble voice within him replied, "Yes." Once the aura within him grew strong enough, Rudder crouched down, surveying the scene. The monster had disintegrated completely. There wasn't even a trace left behind. Vlad approached, concern etched on his face, and asked if Rudder was all right. Without hesitation, Rudder praised him for his excellent work. However, Vlad quickly pointed out that the entire area was engulfed in flames. Rudder shrugged it off, explaining that it was just a plane and the fire would burn itself out soon enough. He attempted to rise, swaying unsteadily and mumbling that all he wanted was an ice-cold beer. But then, he crumpled to the ground like a fool. The voice reminded him that despite his strength, expanding his aura to such an extent was incredibly risky. When he asked for help getting up, Vlad simply sat down beside him, declaring he was tired too. This prince really thinks he's a princess. He glanced at his hand for a moment, a smirk creeping across his face. What's with this guy? Our boy, huh? Unfortunately for him, Miss Alicia already had her sights set on Vlad. Rucker then commented that Vlad was better with horses than he had anticipated. With a confident grin, Vlad replied, "I always said the problem was the horses, not me." Rucker glanced to the side and admitted, "Indeed, it is a magnificent horse." Just as Vlad was about to agree, he received a playful smack on the head. The knights erupted into laughter, finally understanding why their own squires had been on the receiving end of some rough treatment. Vlad, slightly embarrassed, managed a grateful smile and thanked them. Suddenly, a voice called out to him. It was Father Andrea, his expression a mix of desperation and hope, like a man pleading for change at a traffic light. Our protagonist greeted him, relief washing over him as he exclaimed how grateful he was that Andrea was safe. The priest replied, "The moment I saw that light, I knew it was a force strong enough to pierce through the deepest darkness." He took Vlad's hand, knelt down, and offered his heartfelt thanks once more. Our young protagonist felt a wave of awkwardness wash over him as the priests began their prayers. They called upon God to bless his body with divine protection, to grant him solace for his role as a defender of the world, and to show him mercy, for he was a beacon of light. On that day, countless souls had gathered, expanding Vlad's world in ways he had never imagined. Meanwhile, in a grand castle, a figure clutched a letter, his brow furrowed in disbelief. "Is it true?" he demanded. The knight standing behind him nodded solemnly. Yes, it was sent by Dorothea herself. Fury ignited within the Baron as the implications sank and dark magic was at play. The knight added grimly, "It seems some enemies have taken root in the north." The cursed creatures were now seeking revenge on the Empire, emboldened by its recent weakening. However, there was a glimmer of good news. The man nodded, revealing that they had been hearing the boy's name more frequently. First, it was during the expedition. Next came the royal duel. And now, he had played a crucial role in the encounter with the pilgrims. In each of these situations, it was his intervention that had spared House Bayezid from serious trouble. He smirked, acknowledging the boy's remarkable qualities. Then, he ordered for Joseph to be summoned. When the knight inquired if he was going to grant permission, the Lord replied that those who deserve respect must be treated accordingly. Meanwhile, under the moonlight at the pilgrims' camp, everyone gathered around the flickering campfires, while Vlad stood off to the side, observing quietly. As always, he found himself cleaning and sharpening his sword. It wasn't just him. His sword had endured a long day as well. Just then, Rudder appeared, curious about why he was sitting there all alone. Our hero glanced to the side and replied that Dorothea and the chubby guy had already gone to sleep. Rudder then inquired about Father Andrea, who was still deep in prayer with the pilgrims. It dawned on Rudder that everyone was occupied except for him. He was more absorbed in polishing his sword than anything else. Rucker grumbled about being rejected once again, muttering to himself about how peculiar this guy was. He remarked on how Vlad had turned down every offer he had made so far, and wondered if it was some sort of order from Joseph. Meanwhile, our boy picked up a bottle, inspected it, and realized it contained an expensive whiskey. Rucker noted that the sword was not only expensive but also exclusively available to nobles. As Vlad absorbed this information, he recognized that, despite their differences, Rucker was undoubtedly Joseph's brother. Rucker then examined the sword and remarked that it would certainly require repairs. Vlad recalled that he had once approached the Vezid blacksmith for a fix, only to be told that the hilt would need to be broken first. Rucker found this puzzling, but Vlad clarified that the blacksmith had stated only the sword's creator could repair it. The prince smirked, remarking that the sword was just as stubborn as its owner. At that moment, the blonde man chimed in, explaining that he had declined the repair for that very reason. He couldn't bear to part with the sword under any circumstances. It meant everything to him. After a moment of silence, the man finally spoke, acknowledging that he would eventually need to fix it. He realized it could become dangerous to carry it in its current state. When Vlad mentioned his need to locate the person who created it, Rucker asked where that individual could be found. Naturally, my friends, that person was in Skora. The prince mused that there were times he almost forgot his name was Vlad of Skora. A fleeting glance reminded him that the brilliance of Skora truly suited him. That day, he had shone brighter than ever before. Now, he understood why his brother had made such a fuss over this boy. Rising to his feet, he confidently declared that if that were the case, he would surely find a way to get it repaired, sooner or later. Vlad felt a wave of confusion wash over him as Rucker spoke. When someone truly desires something, others will take notice, he said, his voice steady and reassuring. Just then, a man approached, placing a heavy hand on Vlad's shoulder. "You're living a life worthy of respect," he declared before walking away, waving over his shoulder. "Tomorrow, we head straight for Sturma." As Vlad stared at his sword, he couldn't help but think that Rucker was right. One day, he would set things right. There was still a place in the world he needed to return to. At the top of the hill, overlooking everything, stood the path he was destined to follow. It remained still, as if it could sense his very essence. Beneath the stars, he stood there, glowing with determination. Meanwhile, back at the castle, Miss Oksana was deep in thought. She remarked that this piece would be perfect, then inquired if it resembled the emblem of Hal's Hainal. Once the woman confirmed, Oksana declared it was time to create his. The woman then revealed his sword, embedded firmly in the ground, and Oksana confidently stated that she didn't even need to examine it closely. She knew the words by heart. This was the first time in her life she had done something like this, but she had closely observed her mother throughout the process. The woman smiled and remarked that this made the experience all the more meaningful. Oksana nodded in agreement. A tradition like this was not something to be forgotten. After all, the knights of today were far too pampered. They didn't even deserve the right to raise a banner, let alone the honor of raising their own. The next morning, back at the camp, the man beside the jumpy woman remarked that he had never seen anything like it. A herd of wild horses, standing alongside a group of humans. The tiger, observing the scene, nodded in agreement. It truly was a rare sight. It was likely the first and last time they would witness something like this. Reflecting on it, he could already sense the profound impact Vlad's actions had on the lives of those creatures. Meanwhile, our protagonist understood it was time to say goodbye. Just as Vlad had his responsibilities, a horse had to tend to its herd. Suddenly, he halted and reared up at the top of the hill. Vlad realized this was as far as they would go together. As he raised a hand to wave goodbye, Father Andrea gently urged him not to feel sad about it. The boy attempted to brush it off, insisting it was just a horse. And of course, he wasn't sad. But Andrea, with a knowing look, reminded him that he didn't need to hide his true feelings. Life was a tapestry of endings and beginnings, each thread weaving new adventures. He could sense the special bond they shared, and he was certain their paths would cross again someday. The depth of a connection wasn't defined by the time spent together. As he pondered this, it all began to make sense. He held on to the hope that they would reunite one day. The scene shifted back to the mansion, where rain poured relentlessly outside. With a grim expression, the Count received the devastating news. Ravnama had been killed. Yes, the very same man whom Godin had taken down. The reports had just arrived, but the Count had sensed trouble brewing in the west. He hadn't anticipated it would escalate so quickly. Turning to his advisor, he inquired, "Is Count Gaither's family truly that powerful?" The old man explained that the Western families had united, their combined forces now a formidable threat. The Count pondered how the royal family could allow such a situation to unfold. In response, the old man remarked that deciphering the intentions of the central authorities was no easy task. Rising to his feet, the Count declared his unwavering confidence in the strength of the North. The towering walls they had constructed made it nearly impossible for anyone to challenge their authority. Yet these very walls also isolated them from the outside world, cutting off vital news. He reflected on the tragic fate of a once noble family, particularly as the guardians of the pact had met their demise. The Count understood all too well that the old rules and traditions had lost their significance. Everything was being torn apart by a new power, heralding turbulent times ahead. The fall of Count Ravnoma marked the dawn of a new era. Gazing out the window, he noticed people unloading supplies, and it dawned on him that not all of them were pilgrims. Many were refugees fleeing Ravnoma's territory. Meanwhile, Vlad stood there, feeling utterly lost, unsure of what his next move should be. Standing before the door, he realized he had saved the pilgrims, but in doing so, he had also aided Rucker. Joseph would undoubtedly be pleased, which meant Zaire would soon unleash his wrath upon him. With no other option, he knocked and announced his arrival. The voice from within invited him in, and as he entered the room, they remarked on his swift return. They had already heard about the incident and asked if he was okay. Our boy assured them he was fine, and Joseph expressed his relief. However, he quickly reminded him to prepare for the continuation of his training. Vlad nodded in acknowledgement, but deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Joseph seemed unusually different, and there was definitely an unsettling air about the situation. He was definitely in over his head. At that moment, Joseph mentioned Skora. He had some knowledge of how things operated in the slums. From what he understood, a gang conflict only concluded when one side surrendered or was utterly annihilated. Vlad acknowledged this, but he couldn't fathom why Joseph was bringing it up now. Joseph inquired if that was the reason behind the letter, but our protagonist was baffled until Joseph clarified he meant the one about his girlfriend at the convent. Blushing, our boy quickly corrected him, insisting she was just a friend. The prince shrugged it off, acknowledging that it didn't really matter. He understood that Vlad was in a difficult position. He couldn't let anyone who knew him discover he was alive, for their safety depended on it. He wanted to help the boy confront his struggles, but some problems were far more complicated than he had anticipated. Moreover, he believed that the man known as One-Armed Jack could be of great assistance. After all, Vlad was well aware of Jack's influence. He controlled all the money in Shikora. Just then, Joseph stood up and remarked that, on the other hand, the boy had shown remarkable resilience. After all his hard work, a reward was finally on the horizon. Yet, Vlad remained puzzled, struggling to grasp the meaning behind Joseph's words. Joseph explained that raising a banner was the ultimate symbol of honor. He recalled tales from his grandfather's era, when knights proudly displayed their own banners as a mark of distinction. In his heart, Joseph understood that he could never bear a banner himself. That was why he dedicated his life to raising knights, and among them, he had discovered one who was truly worthy of carrying it. With a sense of pride, he picked up the banner and declared to Vlad that he had earned the right to possess his own. Both House Heinel and House Vezid stood in support of his worthiness. Now, as the bearer of Alicia's honor within the ranks of the Vezid, he returned to his homeland, clutching this symbol tightly. Upon his arrival, he knew he had to sever all ties that still bound him to this place. Only when he was completely free would he be ready to return. Vlad felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He recalled how it all began with an old man's sword and the unwavering support of a young woman. The identification provided by the priest and the handkerchief, gifted by a noble lady, had culminated in his own banner, now bearing the names of two distinguished families. Each of these individuals had played a part in shaping the man he had become, yet ultimately, it was his own efforts that had forged his path. With a resolute demeanor, Vlad simply remarked, "An order is an order." He approached the count, standing solemnly before the coffin brought by the pilgrims. He understood its significance all too well. It was the symbol of their pact. Andrea stepped forward, confirming his thoughts. Inside the coffin lay a fragment of a dragon, no ordinary dragon, but the most powerful one that had ever existed. Defeated by the founding king himself, Andrea offered an apology, but the king insisted that this was the truth. Until now, only the Ravnoma family had been able to uphold this pact. The count quickly grasped the situation and assured him it was acceptable. He would personally select knights to safeguard the pact and ensure the transport was executed safely. For the time being, Andrea was to make himself at home until everything was prepared. Andrea expressed her gratitude, and with that, the men began to cover the coffin. Once they had departed, the old man inquired if the Lord felt uneasy about their presence. The count rose to his feet, acknowledging that he understood their predicament all too well. Only one other family had the power to provide protection, the sovereign of the north, Timur Voronov. As he gazed out the window, a sense of unease washed over him. But then something caught his eye, a banner he hadn't seen in years. When the old man leaned closer to look outside, he spotted the boy standing there. Even with all his years of experience, he couldn't recall the last time he had seen such a sight. It was clear to him that the boy was on the brink of starting his journey. The Count felt no surprise. If he were in Vlad's position, he would have made the same choice. Now, Vlad stood as his own man, a knight under his own banner. The Count hoped the young warrior would return to his homeland safely, no matter the weight of the important mission that awaited him there. Meanwhile, in the shadowy alleys of Shura, the same bar where it all began buzzed with anticipation. A crowd of men gathered in front of the stage, their excitement palpable as they debated who would claim her attention. The stakes were high. The one who offered the most would win her favor. In the dressing room, Marcella prepared for her entrance when she heard someone call her name. An elderly woman beside her muttered ominously about a pack of fiery dogs waiting outside, reminding her to keep that in mind. Each of those customers was there to settle her debts. Marcella remained silent as the woman fixed her with a piercing gaze. Then, she stepped closer, grasped the girl's face, and declared that she eagerly anticipated the day Marcella's arrogance would finally shatter. Though still so young, Marcella realized she would spend her entire life here, growing old in this place. She paused for a moment, then let out a laugh, remarking that she doubted the old hag would even live long enough to witness that. The old woman, disgusted by the girl's audacity, someone who had nothing yet refused to give up, turned away, snapping at Marcella to get back to work. Marcella stood there reflecting on how far she had come for someone who made a living selling her body. Surprisingly, she felt a sense of accomplishment. She had enjoyed herself along the way. What brought her peace was knowing she had chosen her own path. Just then, the door swung open, and a chorus of shouts erupted from the men inside, eager to announce they had been waiting for her all night. With that, she completed her thoughts. She had also chosen her own ruin. The old woman advised them to take it easy, warning that tasting that honey would come at a steep price. The first man offered a gold coin, but another quickly doubled the bid. Meanwhile, the other three proposed that if they all entered together, each would contribute a gold coin. Marcella stayed silent as the offers continued to escalate. The old woman beamed with delight, never having imagined that this flower could fetch such a high price. Suddenly, a bald man in the back shouted, "I'll pay 4 gold coins." Intrigued, the woman called out for higher bids, but the men around her were growing increasingly excited. 5 gold coins! One of them exclaimed, realizing that would be enough to indulge in drinks for quite some time. Just as the old woman was about to finalize the deal, a voice from the back called out, "I'll give you 100 gold coins." She nearly choked on her food and everyone turned to see who had interrupted. The figure stepped forward, confidently confirming their offer of 100 gold. At that moment, Marcella felt a shiver run down her spine. She experienced the same chilling sensation as when the one who had devastated this place had arrived. The man approached the doorway, and everyone turned to see a hooded figure emerge. The old woman questioned whether he truly intended to pay 100 gold, but the man simply moved forward, weaving through the crowd. The onlookers parted, curiosity etched on their faces as they wondered who he could be. They didn't know him, but one thing was clear. It was wise not to provoke him. Approaching the counter, he inquired if this was where he should leave the payment. The old woman couldn't help but notice the luxurious attire he wore. While 100 might have been an exaggeration, it was evident he could easily part with 10. She promised to bring him the menu, but he waved her off, saying it wouldn't be necessary. Ever since he left this place, he had longed for the food: the grilled sausage with blood pudding, the hearty potatoes, and a warm, fresh roll. As he pulled back his hood, he declared he would order exactly what George always did. Overwhelmed with emotion, she gazed at the boy before her. The golden aura that enveloped him was not one of greed. He was different. This was the boy George had saved, the one Marcella had tended to that day. Now he stood before her, radiating a brilliance she had never witnessed before. With a confident smile, he declared, "I'm back." To her, he shone like blinding gold. Tears streamed down Marcella's face as the onlookers exchanged puzzled glances. Suddenly, her expression shifted. She urged him to leave at once. One-armed Jack was now in charge of this place. Meanwhile, a woman in the background listened intently, absorbing every word. She sensed their familiarity and an unsettling feeling washed over her. Quickly, she signaled to someone nearby. This situation needed to be contained before it spiraled out of control. Just beside the table, a group of knights stirred, one of them reaching for his sword. He rose to his feet, and in an instant, the atmosphere in the bar shifted as patrons began to react. Vlad sensed that something was amiss. Turning to Marcella, he explained that before he could settle his debts, there were a few scores he needed to settle first. The old woman raised an eyebrow, curious about what he meant. With a steely resolve, Vlad uttered a single name: Jack. "That bastard owes me," he declared. Determination etched on his face. The men in the bar sensed the rising tension and muttered among themselves, questioning who this kid thought he was. Just as one of them was about to mention the boss, Blood sprang into action, swiftly slashing one of them across the neck. A brief glance back revealed the first fool collapsing to the floor, leaving the rest in stunned silence. The old woman and the patrons of the bar froze in shock. Marcella understood in that moment that Vlad was not here to play games. Blood was already seeping onto the floor, and the old woman let out a desperate scream. But Vlad silenced her with a cold command, instructing her to remain quiet and still. If he didn't get what he wanted from the men in the room, she would bear the consequences. With that, the coward retreated into a corner, trembling in silence. The other men in the bar raised their swords, demanding to know who he thought he was. They pressed him for the name of his master, but Vlad offered only one, Georgie. Ever since he had left this place, he had been nothing more than George's dagger, ready to strike at his command. They looked puzzled by the title, until one of them suddenly shouted, recalling a memory. It was Vlad, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy who used to stand beside George. One of the group insisted it was impossible. Everyone knew that scrawny kid had died, but his friend leaned in, whispering that it was unmistakably him standing right in front of them. Moreover, they had all heard whispers of a generous reward for anyone who could deliver the kid's head to the boss. At that moment, Vlad silenced them with a commanding glare, urging them to come at him. It was reminiscent of that day when their thirst for blood had been palpable. Yet now, the men in the bar seemed far less eager. Even though he stood alone, Vlad exuded the fierce presence of a wolf on the hunt. Vlad declared that if they weren't going to make a move, then he would. With a sudden lunge, he dodged the first strike and slashed a foe across the gut. A quick glance to the side revealed another attacker approaching from behind, sword raised. But before the blow could land, Vlad spun around and dispatched him as well. He was completely surrounded now, but that only fueled his determination. With every strike he delivered, a scream reverberated through the bar, each cry marking the loss of another life. Vlad was determined, and no one would leave that room alive. The fools were caught off guard, helpless as they were mercilessly butchered. Vlad vowed to make them pay for every tear Marcella had shed. And this would continue until he chose to end it. Meanwhile, in another corner of the bar, Jack sipped his drink in quiet contemplation. He set his bottle down on the table and leaned back, feeling a sense of ownership over Shura now that George had departed. Yet, deep down, he knew this wasn't enough. He yearned for something far greater, convinced he was destined for more than this. And that was why he had never hesitated to take lives, amassing the corpses of his enemies to reach his goal. Yet, now that he stood at the pinnacle, a harsh truth dawned on him. The fates of those in the slums were dictated by those above them. In the end, his own existence felt hollow. He had always believed that victory equated to success. But what had it truly brought him? Despite becoming the Lord of Shura, he had still faced defeat. George may have won the battle, but he was dead. What did his victory truly matter now? A single word from someone at the top had been enough to alter his fate. Just then, the door swung open and someone rushed in, urgently informing the boss of an emergency. Jack wanted to understand the situation, so he asked the man what the problem was. The man replied, "We're surrounded." Confused, Jack pressed for clarification, asking exactly where they were encircled. The man explained that the entire slum was under siege, with soldiers stationed all around. Just then, another man opened a window and confirmed the dire news to the boss. Soldiers were also at the back entrance. Outside, troops stood rigidly in formation, leaving the men inside bewildered. They had fulfilled their obligations this month. So why was this happening? Perhaps it was just a routine patrol, but the sheer number of soldiers was alarming. Then, Jack erupted into laughter. He had known this day would come eventually. In the end, he felt a surprising sense of relief. Facing destruction head-on was far better than living in constant fear of when it would finally catch up to him. Outside, a boy approached, drenched in blood. One of the soldiers turned to Borden, reporting that everything was in place. He inquired if all the exits had been secured, to which the man nodded in confirmation. Indeed, they had done everything they could. The chubby man let out a heavy sigh, suggesting that next time they should ensure things didn't spiral so far out of control. Even the Count had caught wind of the chaos unfolding here. The soldier, looking sheepish, once again apologized, confessing that one-armed Jack was a far more formidable opponent than he had anticipated. Borden recognized it as just an excuse, but he chose to remain silent. As he pondered the identity of this stranger, he couldn't help but question how a knight like him was so well acquainted with the alleys of Shura. With a forced smile, he remarked on his relief that they had finally arrived, ready to rid the city of the disease that plagued it. Yet deep down, Borden understood the truth. The real affliction lay with this man. Jack had amassed far too much power for someone who hailed from these slums. The only reason Jack acted as he did was that he and the mayor had tacitly permitted it. Borden, a man well acquainted with bribery, could easily recognize when someone was being bought off. The mayor, attempting to mask his eagerness, inquired about the arrival of the Wayazid Knights. Borden's reply was simple. He's already here. Just then, Vlad stepped through the gate. The man inquired if this was the knight they had dispatched. To him, it seemed utterly insane. They needed to send more men alongside him. However, Borden firmly replied, "No, you can't do that." The truth was, Joseph had meticulously prepared for this moment. It was meant to be Vlad's official debate. After a brief pause, Borden turned to the boy and asked, "Are you sure about this?" It would be wiser to bring more knights along. With over 50 people inside, the odds were stacked against them. Vlad insisted that even if he were to get hurt, he wouldn't allow Borden to take the blame. But Borden recognized that was merely talk. There were no guarantees. Yet, despite the uncertainty, our boy remained focused, his gaze locked on the target ahead. Observing the scene, Borden gently reminded Joseph of the promise he had made. He urged him to take the banner. Joseph had been adamant. It was meant to be presented to him personally in front of a multitude of witnesses. With a nod of acceptance, Vlad took the banner and firmly planted it into the ground. The knights gathered below stood in stunned silence, taken aback by the moment. This was a tradition many believed had long since faded into obscurity. Little did they know the significance of the figure before them, a man worthy of his own banner. One knight remarked that he had heard Vlad was a knight of House Vazid. Vlad stood frozen, his gaze fixed on the land before him. In that moment, it felt as though the entire realm belonged to him. He had earned the authority to shape his destiny as he saw fit. Now, the fate of the people rested in his hands. Borden unfurled a document and began to read it aloud for Jack. It was an official proclamation condemning him for his crimes in Stora. He had exploited the very people who lived here and defied the law. This was the reason House Vazid had taken action. His misdeeds would no longer go unpunished, and they had dispatched a representative to confront him. This could very well have the full backing of House Vazid and the church. That was why Jack and his men were instructed to open the gates and allow the representative inside. The soldiers began striking their lances against the ground, chanting Vazid. From above, the residents of the slums quickly grasped the significance of the moment. Meanwhile, inside the room, Jack remained seated in the same chair, a picture of calm amidst the brewing storm. After hearing the proclamation, Borden declared that Vlad now had full authority and support for his mission. He could proceed without hesitation. Vlad expressed his gratitude, and Borden cautioned him to remain vigilant. Then a voice warned Vlad that someone was already waiting for him up there. He needed to stay alert. Danger could strike from any direction. This would be a fear unlike any he had faced before. When life hung in the balance, the one who struck first often emerged victorious, so making a strong first impression was crucial. As he concentrated on his aura, Vlad couldn't help but wonder, had George survived that day? If he hadn't brought God into this place? What if Jack had never issued his threat? Perhaps Godin wouldn't have even needed to come at all. He had replayed those possibilities countless times in his mind. The soldiers remained oblivious to his intentions until he sliced through the curtain. As it began to fall, he leaped, seizing hold of it and soaring upward. Before the men could even react, he had already reached the second floor. Standing behind the men setting traps, he scoffed. "You're all pathetic. Is this really all you can do?" With a fierce determination, he charged forward. This time, they had no choice but to fight back. The first attacker swung his sword, but Vlad deftly dodged, tearing him apart in a swift motion. As he cut through the ranks of his foes, a realization began to dawn on Vlad. Today, his sword felt sharper than ever. Yet, enemies continued to swarm from all directions. He remained unfazed. The wooden sword used in training had proven far more dangerous than this. He attempted to catch his breath for just a moment, but an arrow whizzed perilously close to his head. One of the men cursed, "That damn rat just won't die." As arrows rained down around him, Vlad sprinted down the corridor, skillfully dodging each projectile. With a quick glance to the side, he leaped toward the archers. In midair, he snatched an arrow from the air, landing gracefully behind them. With a swift motion, he cut them down one by one. The men began to falter, their confidence wavering, and Vlad let out a weary sigh. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be," he muttered, frustration creeping into his voice. If only they would just stand still, he wouldn't have to approach each one of them. The tension hung in the air as he swallowed hard, while our protagonist casually took a sip of water. Setting the cup down, he asked, "So, how are we doing this? Am I supposed to go over there, or are you all coming to me?" Regardless, rent still needed to be paid. Jack's goons had begun to think this place was theirs, but they were sorely mistaken. Long before their arrival, this territory belonged to the Smiling Rose. From the very start, this was his domain. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, a certain fool pondered what Jack could possibly be thinking. Even the seasoned criminals of Skora couldn't match his level of recklessness. Since George's death, Jack had transformed into someone unrecognizable. He was stealing more than ever, engaging in increasingly audacious crimes, and his desperation was palpable. If he continued down this path, it wouldn't just be him in trouble. The entire city of Skora was on the brink of collapse. He couldn't shake the thought of how they were going to explain losing half their contraband again. Just then, someone burst through the door, urgently calling for Harvin. Wrong name, but that was the least of his concerns. The messenger reported that the slum was in complete chaos and the entire area had been locked down. Seeking clarity, he pressed for a better explanation, only to hear that the forces from Sturma were targeting Jack. The city guards and knights had encircled the entire district. Just as Harvin had anticipated, Jack had crossed the line. But this development wasn't necessarily a positive one. With Jack's departure, a power struggle would inevitably erupt as factions vied for control. Then someone posed the question, "Aren't you close to that guy?" Harvin narrowed his eyes. Who? The name hung in the air, Vlad. Harvin urged him to stop tossing around random names like that. Yet, his colleagues insisted that if he hadn't witnessed it himself, he would never have believed it. The executioner they dispatched had blonde hair. Harvin returned to his notes, muttering that Vlad wasn't the only blonde in existence. The man revealed that the individual had introduced himself as Vlad of Shura. At that moment, realization struck Harvin, and he asked if the man was certain. The man nodded, confirming it. Just minutes ago, he had even planted his banner right in front of the smiling rose. Harvin began to tremble. He had heard the rumors. This was the new squire of the Vizid, the one who had awakened his aura in an honor duel. Not only that, but he had also played a pivotal role in the hunt for a death worm. His name was Vlad of Shura, and he was exactly who everyone said he was. Perhaps the rumors held some truth, but he would need to witness it firsthand. Meanwhile, Vlad soared through the air, dispatching yet another foe. Just then, a fool attempted to seize the moment, sneaking up from behind. In an instant, our hero turned and hurled the dagger straight into the enemy's brainstem. The body crumpled to the ground as more men charged forward. Undeterred, Vlad pressed on, slicing through them with relentless precision. As blood splattered around him, the watching spirit began to take note. Each battle felt as if he were possessed, driven by an unyielding force. He wasn't just skilled and diligent. He possessed an iron will that set him apart from the rest. The boy was a natural-born killer. Vlad smirked, teasing that the man would soon need dentures. The poor soul stood there, toothless, as Vlad offered a twisted reassurance. "Don't worry, you won't need to bite anything anymore." The man's hand trembled, and another tooth fell. Then, a voice declared that this was enough. Gazing at the trail of bodies, Vlad couldn't help but acknowledge the grim truth. He had indeed recreated the massacre from that fateful day. But now, it was time to bring this to an end. Jack sat in silence, his eyes closed, until the sound of footsteps broke through his thoughts. The door creaked open, and Vlad stepped inside, announcing to the boss, "I'm back." Jack smiled as he welcomed the rising star, offering him a drink. But when he looked at the boy's face, he was struck by an expression that seemed drenched in blood. Chuckling softly, he remarked, "In this state, it wouldn't be much fun." So it was true Vlad of Shora had arrived. Jack had heard the whispers, but he never truly believed the tales could be this grim. Jack took a sip from his glass, then slammed it down with a hint of frustration. "I really should have had you work for me," he confessed. "But to do that, you would have had to torture the kid. And honestly, that would have been a terrible idea. He'd be the one dead by now." He stood up, a hint of relief in his voice. "At least I'm glad it's with someone I know." He had been stalling for far too long. Drawing his sword, he declared that he was the kind of man who preferred to settle matters swiftly. Yet all Vlad could think about was how weary he had grown of their relationship. That man's presence felt like a parasite, draining the very essence of his life. But now, the once overwhelming aura that had intimidated him during their first encounter seemed to have faded. Now he was certain this man couldn't hold him back. Vlad steeled himself and urged Jack to brace for impact. Jack simply replied, "Come at me with everything you got." With that, Vlad charged forward, fully aware that this man had once been his foe. Their blades met in a fierce clash, unleashing a shockwave that sent everything around them flying. "Since we were once enemies," Vlad declared, "I'll show you the respect you deserve." His blade sliced through the air, but Jack swiftly countered, deflecting Vlad's sword upward. The force sent Vlad stumbling back, but he quickly regained his footing and launched another assault. The intensity of his strikes was a testament to his respect for Jack. Yet with each attack fueled by his aura, Jack felt his legs begin to tremble. It was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain his balance against the relentless onslaught. This was how respect was demonstrated in Skora. Jack was struggling, relying on his one hand and half an arm just to keep pace, but it still wasn't enough. He managed to knock Vlad's arm upward, attempting a counterattack, but our boy blocked it effortlessly. Jack couldn't help but admit it. This was a surprise. The kid had truly transformed from the child who once wielded a wooden sword. Now, Jack began to grasp how Vlad had managed to come this far. In that moment, he felt a genuine admiration for the boy's progress. Long ago, Jack had harbored a dream of his own. He had yearned to seize brilliance with his own hands, but to achieve that, he needed power, and more blood. He had done whatever it took to survive in this place, where good and evil held no meaning, all in pursuit of reaching the pinnacle of the city. Yet even at the top, his dream remained tantalizingly out of reach. The brilliance he once sought was now marred by blood and greed. As he noticed the stars drawing near, he instinctively shielded his eyes. Vlad charged in for the attack, and in that moment, he realized a profound truth. To wield brilliance, one must truly deserve it. Jack was no longer just one-armed Jack. His remaining arm slammed against the ground as he clutched his wound, desperately trying to stem the flow of blood. Yet, despite his determination, Vlad was weary from the relentless battle. Jack winced in pain, but soon burst into laughter. This is incredible, he thought. George would have loved this. However, their companion was far from amused. He lunged forward, snapping at Jack to be quiet. Yet, despite his anger, Jack managed to block another attack. Vlad's fury simmered beneath the surface. He would never forgive this man. After all, he was responsible for George's death. He had swallowed the smiling rose at its most vulnerable moment. He was the man who had attempted to sell Marsala, and that made his fate clear. He deserved nothing less than a wretched end. Vlad continued to strike, yet even as he was being cut down, Jack maintained his smile, declaring that tonight was a night of joy. It was the perfect occasion to crack open every barrel in the place and throw a grand feast. He assured the boy that he was confident he would surpass anything he had ever achieved. Yet Vlad continued to lash out, demanding he shut up, while Jack maintained his smile. As Vlad lunged for another strike, Jack stepped forward, blood splattering around him. It dripped onto the floor, and from the shadows, the truth of the situation became painfully clear. Jack considered that perhaps this was for the best. Instead of being crushed by George's overwhelming strength, it felt more fitting to be defeated by a young man striving for greatness. Vlad then inquired about Jack's last words. With his hook resting against his side, Jack acknowledged the kid's tenacity and urged him to make the most of his time in this world. Our protagonist remained silent as he drew his sword free. Jack staggered back, desperately trying to hold his wound. He muttered that the boy had fought valiantly. Deep down, Jack recognized the truth. He had lived a wicked life, yet he had always done his best each day. Even as he faced the light he had once pursued, he turned to Vlad and praised him for an incredible job. Raising his hook high, he expressed his gratitude for the good times they had shared. Then, with a stumble, he fell from the upper floor, his smile unwavering. All Vlad could hear was the sound of the impact. He had always believed that revenge would be sweet, which was why he had pursued it relentlessly. Yet, in that moment, a bitter taste lingered in his mouth. Turning around, he noticed the glass Jack had left behind. He approached it, picked it up, and took a drink. Jack's words echoed in his mind, reminding him that he would go further than he ever had. After a moment of silence, Vlad placed the glass down and murmured that this was for him. A knight, he believed, should only accept rewards that matched his deeds. The Smiling Rose was merely a temporary haven for outsiders, but tonight, a dark chapter of his life had been wiped clean. With that thought, Vlad stepped out into the night. Outside, beneath the banner, Warden stood uneasily. The silence felt heavy. What had happened? Just then, Vlad appeared, clad in red. He opened his mouth to speak, but a single glance from the boy sent shivers down the spines of the soldiers. They were in disbelief. This was all blood, and he had fought 50 men all on his own. The boy stood apart from the others, exuding an aura that was both impressive and intimidating. Warden couldn't shake the feeling of dread that washed over him, yet the boy himself appeared weary. Warden swallowed hard as Vlad strode past him. Just as he reached the stairs, a voice called out his name. Turning around, he saw a man leaning on a cane, introducing himself as Harvin. But Vlad, weary and disoriented, struggled to recognize his friend. There he stood, restrained by the soldiers. In that moment, reality crashed down on Vlad, and the memories flooded back. Warden, observing the connection between them, commanded the soldiers to step aside and let him through. Stumbling, Harbin approached our boy, his voice filled with concern as he called out Vlad's name, questioning if it was truly him and if he was all right. In response, our boy smiled. He really was his friend. Vlad dropped his sword and stepped forward, enveloping Harbin in a tight hug, admitting that his whole body ached. Harbin simply wanted to understand what had happened to him, yet there he stood, smiling serenely, declaring that for the first time he truly felt like he had returned. In the next scene, after a long night, the sky was a brilliant blue. As our boy awoke, he remarked that he still couldn't quite adjust to this new reality. Gazing down at the city from above, he found it odd not to be lost in the familiar alleys below. Got entered the room and urged Vlad to get some more rest. But Vlad grimaced, revealing that the pain was so intense that even the thought of sleep felt unbearable. Curiously, he asked what Got was holding. With a hint of awkwardness, Got replied that he had come to give the boy a bath. Vlad, clearly puzzled, wanted to know what had happened to him. Got, fidgeting slightly, simply stated that Vlad had always been like this and had never changed. The truth was, he spotted many of Vlad's old comrades nearby and feared being cast aside. There was no way he wanted to be left alone at the estate tending to the horses. That was precisely what Vlad suspected he was thinking. He reassured his friend not to be hasty. If he performed well, he would undoubtedly be rewarded. Got was brimming with excitement, but our boys simply told him that if that was the case, he could take the bucket and leave. However, Got's enthusiasm was overwhelming, and all Vlad wanted was a moment of peace. It was then that Vlad recalled he needed to inform our boy that Mr. Borden wished to speak with him, a conversation Vlad was eager to have as well. A lavish feast was spread across the table, and our protagonist cautioned that if they continued indulging like this, a heart attack was inevitable. Yet the rotund man with the mustache shrugged off the warning, admitting he was destined for a heart attack no matter what he consumed. He gestured toward a mountain of papers he was buried under, urging the boy to grasp the weight of his predicament. The shadow Jack had cast over Skora was far darker than he had ever anticipated. Vlad replied that it was no surprise, considering the man had spent his entire life in that place. Borden reminded him that it would take a considerable amount of time to erase the influence that the man had established. He then inquired about Vlad's next move now that his job was complete. They would remain there, awaiting further orders from the Basev family, and he asked if Vlad could lend a hand. Vlad shrugged, saying there wasn't much he could do if the problem was just paperwork. In response, Borden picked up a sheet and handed it to him. As Joseph read it, he realized it was a permit, allowing him to act in place of the guards. Borden explained that with this document, Joseph could arrest anyone he deemed a criminal and was expected to eliminate the criminal element he was familiar with. Essentially, Joseph intended to use this opportunity to clean up the streets. The mission was clear: eradicate the corruption and allow the city to rise anew. He, with his intimate knowledge of the place, was undoubtedly the right man for the task. However, Borden insisted there was no need to hurry. He could even take the time to pick up his girlfriend. Our protagonist quickly corrected him, stating she was merely a friend. Borden dismissed the remark, casually mentioning he had already sent a visit request to the convent, but it would take a few days to get a response. Vlad expressed his gratitude, genuinely impressed by the man's meticulous nature, which exceeded his expectations. Just as he was about to comment on it, he realized the man was already aware of everything. However, there was one detail he had missed. He turned to Borden and asked if the men who worked for Jack were in prison. Borden confirmed, yes. After they were all beaten up, they were locked away. Our protagonist expressed a desire to visit them, prompting Borden to question his motives. He replied that there was someone he needed to find. The scene then shifted to the prison, where Vlad contemplated the likelihood of the person being there. In the shadows behind the bars, a figure sat quietly, and the glint in his eyes confirmed it was indeed him. Vlad realized he would have to scour every corner of the city to track this individual down. As the guard strolled through the prison, he couldn't help but ponder the situation. Everyone was convinced that the man they held was the former dagger of George, yet no one understood his purpose for being there. It was hard to believe that he had risen to become a representative of the Wazid. Whispers circulated among the prisoners, and one voice broke the tension, suggesting that perhaps he had come seeking revenge for the events of that fateful day. Lads simply stared at them, and in that moment, fear washed over their faces. They scurried to the back of the cell like frightened dogs, but our boy remained calm, scanning the shadows until he spotted his target. The man had clearly endured much. Vlad called out, offering a lifeline for 40 silver coins. He would ensure the man's escape. It was him, the man with the cart, the very same who had fled the city, a fool who had endured endless suffering in that place. For the first time, he saw a hand reaching out to help him. It was the boy he had saved, despite all he had endured. The scene shifted to the convent, where the nuns gathered at the window, peering outside with a mix of curiosity and concern. With smiles on their faces, they announced his arrival. Inside the carriage, Vlad approached, and the girls couldn't help but swoon, whispering about how incredibly handsome he was. His striking banana-colored hair gave him away as the famous Wazid squire. If he was a squire, could it be that he had already been promoted tonight? Given that the nun herself was walking beside him, it seemed likely. What they failed to grasp was the reason behind the throng of people following that boy. A girl nearby chimed in, her tone laced with understanding. "It's obvious," she said. "They want to get close to someone connected to the Wazid." As she spoke, it all clicked for her. No wonder they had bought so much wine. Meanwhile, Jemena stood in the corner, diligently cleaning the plates. Suddenly, a well-fed nun swung open the door, her voice cutting through the air as she inquired why they were all standing around idly. She reminded them that an important visitor was on the way. The girls quickly apologized, promising to get back to work. As the nun departed, she mentioned that prayers would begin soon. With that, the girls exchanged glances and turned to the redhead, teasing her that they had pinpointed the problem. She was simply too slow. Jemena stood there, feeling utterly dejected, having offered her apologies without a word of explanation. As the other girls left, excitedly chattering about enjoying the ceremony and reminding her to tidy up, she felt a wave of loneliness wash over her. They had claimed the front row for themselves, leaving her behind. Inside the church, the atmosphere shifted as someone announced the arrival of a special guest, a distinguished representative from the Wazid house, blessed by Father Andrea himself. The anticipation in the air was palpable. As the priest delivered his blessing, the nuns couldn't help but blush, whispering among themselves about how incredible it all was. It was the first time they had encountered a knight who seemed to have stepped straight out of a fairy tale. Meanwhile, Vlad scanned the room, his gaze shifting from side to side. The girls exchanged glances, wondering if he was actually looking at them, their biscuit-like faces betraying any hope of capturing his attention. Our boy scanned the crowd, searching for someone he couldn't quite see, though he distinctly remembered summoning them all. Just then, the nun clasped her hands together, announcing that it was time to pray. Ironically, our boy, a non-believer who prayed more fervently than any devout soul, stood there, whispering among the others. The artist had put in great effort to give everyone peculiar-looking heads, and just as the prayer was about to begin, a girl rushed in, clearly late. The moment he heard the footsteps, a smile crept onto Vlad's face. He already knew who it was. She opened the door, relief washing over her as she realized the ceremony wasn't over yet. Slipping into the back of a line, Vlad turned to glance behind him. Though her face was partially obscured by the light, he could still see the anger etched on it. As he turned away, the nun inquired if something was troubling him. He simply replied that the girl was nothing but skin and bones, implying that they weren't even feeding her. Confused, the woman didn't grasp his meaning, but he walked off, muttering that he wished he could teach everyone a lesson. He then made his way toward Jemena, while the other girls looked on, uncertain and curious. She caught a glimpse of his face and briefly wondered if he resembled Vlad. But recalling the boy from before, she lowered her head, convinced it couldn't be him. Then he called her name. When she looked up, there he was, standing right in front of her. From this angle, he seemed to tower over her, as if he were 2.36 meters tall. He noticed her clothes were filthy and couldn't help but ask, "What on earth happened to you?" Crouching down, he remarked on how much of a mess she was, while the nuns looked on in confusion, bewildered by the scene unfolding before them. Ignoring their puzzled expressions, he turned to them and asked, "You mean to tell me you haven't fed her or washed her clothes?" Jemena stood frozen, her gaze fixed on him as he continued to voice his complaints. Trembling slightly, she finally mustered the courage to reach out and grasp a lock of his hair. He asked if she wasn't listening and urged her to respond, but when he looked up, he was taken aback to see tears streaming down her face. For a brief moment, his heart ached for her, but he quickly shook it off. Standing up, he declared that he didn't care about formalities anymore. They were leaving together now. He called her to come home, and in that moment, she realized it was the first time anyone had ever said something like that to her. Both were children of the slums, raised without families, leaving them with no home to return to. They often went hungry, but the one thing they had was each other. Together, they embarked on a quest for a place to call home and a family to belong to. As they settled into the carriage, Jemena curled up tightly. She glanced at him, and he noticed her unease. "What's bothering you?" he asked, concern lacing his voice. She kept stealing furtive glances at him, her gaze lingering on the boy who seemed to radiate a newfound glow. Clutching her clothes nervously, she finally admitted that he had changed too much. Noticing her silence, he asked why she was acting so strangely when it had only been 6 months since they last saw each other. Despite her silence, she eventually looked up and noticed how noble he appeared, while she felt like a ragged shadow of herself, tattered and dirty. Just as she opened her mouth to speak, he abruptly stuffed something into it, insisting that she was utterly lost, but this would surely make her feel better. She asked him what it was, and he replied that it was a caramel he had received while assisting that night. Finding it odd, she questioned whether someone would truly give away something so expensive, suggesting that he might still be stealing. But Vlad shrugged off her concerns, telling her she could think whatever she wanted. Silence fell between them once more, and when he glanced at her, he noticed tears streaming down her face again. "Why are you crying now?" he asked gently. She snapped back, accusing him of taking too long to come for her. He reached out to comfort her, but she pulled her arm away. Resigned, he leaned out the window, taking a moment to appreciate the pleasant weather. This was Skora, the place where it all began. No matter where a person is born, everyone deserves their own star, just like they do. However, making that star shine in the sky was an entirely different matter. As he watched the coal burn, the blacksmith mused that it mirrored his own life-wasting time with nothing to occupy his hands. With the city's thugs absent, he decided it was best to close up shop early today. He stepped outside and cast a glance to the side, where a sword lay abandoned. Curiosity tugged at him. What was that boy up to? Earlier that day, the boy had made him proud, yet a pang of sympathy lingered in his heart. He hoped fervently that the child hadn't frozen to death out there. Just then, someone approached and asked why he was closing so early. The blacksmith urged him to return another day, but the man insisted that wouldn't be possible. He was preoccupied tomorrow and needed this matter resolved today. The old man scoffed, questioning what a thug from this region could possibly be so busy with. In response, the man revealed he needed the blacksmith to examine a sword that hadn't been repaired in centuries. Our boy approached, sharing that he had spoken to other blacksmiths, but they all agreed that only one man could handle the task. The old man paused for a moment, and Vlad seized the opportunity to ask if it was true. Instantly, the old man's demeanor brightened as he assured the boy that he could indeed fix the sword. He gestured for him to come inside and take a seat. With a sense of anticipation, our boy handed over the sword, and the blacksmith examined it closely. It was evident he intended to make excellent use of it. He inquired about some of the scratches, and Vlad explained they were from the Winter Goblin expedition. When he asked about others, our hero revealed they were from a duel of honor in Dimar. The last and most significant marks, the ones near the tip, were from the fierce battle against the Deathworm. As he gazed into the blade's polished surface, the blacksmith couldn't help but admire all that this sword had endured. He felt a swell of pride for the boy. Instead of being trapped in that place, he was finally realizing his full potential. Rising to his feet, he declared that he hadn't felt this happy since the day he completed that masterpiece. As he began heating the furnace for repairs, the embers once on the brink of extinguishing suddenly flared to life with renewed intensity. And that man's light shone brightly, much like the vibrant lights in this video, designed to create even more captivating content for his viewers. Don't forget to activate the cheeky little bell